The teacup shattered against marble before anyone could stop it. Isabel Ashford stood frozen at the head of the dining table, her sister's words still hanging in the air like poisoned gas. "He was never yours, Isabel. He was always mine. You just couldn't bear to admit it." Lydia's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Around them, Sir Reginald's birthday guests sat in horrified silence, watching the Ashford family tear itself apart over breakfast. But what they didn't know, what even Lydia didn't fully understand, was that Isabel had orchestrated this loss herself. 3 years ago, she'd given Adrian away like a chess piece, believing her fragile sister needed saving more than she needed love. Now the bill had come due, and the price was public humiliation. If you want to see how far this story of power, betrayal, and brutal choices travels, drop a comment with your city below. Hit that like button, and let's begin. Isabel didn't run. That would have been the expected thing, the human thing. Instead, she set down her napkin with the kind of precision that made the gesture feel like a declaration of war, rose from her chair, and walked out of Sir Reginald's dining room at exactly the pace she'd entered it. Not fast enough to suggest panic, not slow enough to invite further comment. Behind her, the silence fractured into urgent whispers. "Someone should let her go," came Lydia's voice, bright with venom. "She's perfected the art of the dignified exit, always has." Isabel's hands didn't shake until she reached the entrance hall. Then they trembled so violently she had to grip the doorframe to steady herself, fingers pressing into carved oak that had stood there for 200 years. Older than this humiliation, older than her mistakes. The morning air outside was knife-sharp, February in the English countryside at its most unforgiving. Isabel welcomed it. Cold was clarifying. Cold didn't allow for sentiment. She made it as far as the stone fountain before her knees threatened to buckle. He was never yours. The thing about a well-aimed lie, Isabel thought, was that it only worked when wrapped around a truth. Lydia had been imprecise, sloppy even, but the core accusation had teeth. Adrian hadn't been hers, not because he'd belonged to Lydia, but because Isabel had cut him loose 3 years ago with surgical efficiency, believing she was saving everyone involved. Turned out she'd only been saving herself from having to choose honestly. "Miss Ashford, but is She turned to find Martin, Sir Reginald's head groundskeeper, approaching with the cautious gait of someone who'd worked around volatile situations long enough to recognize one. He was holding her coat. "You left this," he said simply. Isabel took it, managed something approximating a smile. "Thank you, Martin. The south gate's open, if you prefer a quieter exit." Translation: half the household staff had probably witnessed that disaster through various doorways, and Martin was offering her a path that didn't require running a gauntlet of pitying stares. "That's kind of you." He nodded once, then retreated with the discretion that made him worth twice his salary. Isabel pulled on her coat and started walking. The Ashford estate sat 3 miles north of Sir Reginald's property, connected by a network of footpaths that Isabel had known since childhood. She'd walked them countless times, first as a girl trailing after her father during his surveys of the land, later as a young woman trying to escape her mother's drawing room machinations, and finally as the architect of her own carefully controlled domain. Control. That had always been her answer to chaos. When their father died and left the estate drowning in debt, Isabel had been 19. Lydia had been 16 and already showing signs of the fragility that would define her. Panic attacks that left her gasping in corners. Periods of such deep melancholy she couldn't leave her room for weeks. Their mother had looked at Isabel with desperate eyes and said, "You'll have to be strong enough for both of them now." So Isabel had learned to be strong in the way women of her class and generation understood strength. Through management, through strategic silence, through the careful cultivation of systems that ran so smoothly, no one had to acknowledge the effort required. She'd saved the estate, renegotiated the debts, consolidated the holdings, turned unprofitable farmland into a model of efficiency that other landowners studied and grudgingly admired. By 22, she'd stabilized everything. By 23, she'd met Adrian Grayson. Isabel stopped walking, stood in the middle of the path with her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets. Adrian. God, what a disaster that had been. Not in the way people usually meant. There'd been no scandal, no ruin, no dramatic midnight confrontations. Just a barrister with sharp eyes and sharper questions who'd shown up to advise on a property dispute and had somehow seen through every defense Isabel had spent years constructing. "You're exhausted," he'd said once, about 6 weeks into their acquaintance. They'd been reviewing contracts in her study, and Isabel had rubbed her temples without thinking. "I'm fine. You're running an estate that should employ a full management team, caring for a sister who needs professional help you can't afford to seek, and somehow maintaining the fiction that none of this is extraordinary." He'd set down his pen. "I'm not criticizing. I'm just wondering when you last did something for yourself." The question had cracked something in her chest. What followed had been 3 months of the most intense connection Isabel had ever experienced, not despite the complications, but woven through them. Adrian understood complexity. He didn't try to simplify her life or offer solutions that required her to become a different person. He just saw her, the real her, the tired, brilliant, occasionally ruthless woman beneath the careful exterior. "I love you," he'd said one evening, standing in the same study, backlit by late summer sun. "And I think you love me, but I also think you're going to find a reason why this can't work. That's not, isn't it?" He'd crossed to her, cupped her face with both hands. "Isabel, you're allowed to want things. You're allowed to choose yourself." But that was the problem. Choosing herself meant watching Lydia deteriorate further, meant admitting their mother couldn't hold everything together, meant surrendering the control that kept their entire world from collapse. So Isabel had done what she did best. She'd engineered an outcome. She'd introduced Adrian to Lydia at a carefully orchestrated dinner party, watched as her sister, bright and charming during her good periods, had captivated him with the kind of unguarded warmth Isabel herself had never managed. Then Isabel had slowly, systematically withdrawn, creating space for something to develop between them. Adrian had fought it at first. "What are you doing?" he'd demanded, cornering her at another gathering a month later. "I'm making room," Isabel had said coolly. Lydia needs professional help and a family that stops using her as an excuse for cowardice." His voice had been quiet, furious. "You're hiding behind her. I'm protecting her. You're protecting yourself from having to risk anything real." He'd been right, of course, but Isabel had held her ground until he'd finally, furiously, given up. Within 6 months, he and Lydia were engaged. Within a year, married. Isabel had stood at that wedding with a champagne glass in her hand and perfect posture, believing she'd made the noble choice. 3 years later, Lydia had thrown it all back in her face across a birthday breakfast table. The Ashford estate house appeared through the trees, gray stone, 3 stories, Elizabethan bones wrapped in Georgian additions. Isabel felt the familiar weight of it settle across her shoulders as she approached. This place had shaped her, defined her, and possibly destroyed her capacity for anything that couldn't be controlled or managed. Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, met her at the door with one look at Isabel's face and the immediate production of tea. "Drawing room?" she said firmly. "I'll bring it in." Isabel didn't argue. She sank into the chair by the fire and let the warmth begin to thaw her fingers while her mind continued its relentless cataloging of damage. The breakfast scene would be all over the county by evening. Lydia's accusation, dramatic, public, devastating, would be repeated and embellished until it took on the weight of established fact. Isabel Ashford, the ice queen who'd stolen her sister's happiness, finally exposed. Except that wasn't what had happened, and Lydia knew it. The tea arrived. Isabel drank it automatically while staring into the fire. "Miss Ashford?" She looked up to find Mrs. Henderson still hovering, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Yes?" "Mr. Whitmore sent a message. He'd like to see you at your earliest convenience. Something about the trust accounts." "The trust. Of course." Isabel set down her teacup with hands that had finally stopped shaking. 3 years ago, when she'd orchestrated her own heartbreak and handed Adrian to Lydia like a gift, Isabel had needed something to fill the space left behind. She'd created the Ashford Women's Trust, a charitable foundation dedicated to education and employment for women and children in circumstances that left them vulnerable. It had started small. A house in the village converted to a training center, basic literacy programs, apprenticeships with local businesses that Isabel had personally negotiated and funded. But it had grown, carefully, systematically, into something that now employed 14 women, educated 30 children, and operated at exactly 0 deficit, because Isabel ran it with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to everything else. It was the thing she'd built while everyone else watched her sister's marriage. The thing she controlled when everything else had spun away from her. And if Dennis Whitmore, the trust's accountant, and one of the few people Isabel actually trusted, needed to see her urgently, something was wrong. Isabel stood, smoothed her skirt, checked her reflection in the mirror above the mantel. Her face looked pale, tight around the eyes, but composed. Good enough. Tell Mr. Whitmore I'll meet him at the trust offices within the hour, she said. Mrs. Henderson nodded, retreated. Isabel finished her tea, gathered her coat and gloves, and walked back out into the cold. The trust offices occupied a converted warehouse on the edge of the village. Solid brick, good light, close enough to the main road for accessibility, but far enough from the estate's main holdings that it felt separate, independent. Isabel had chosen the location deliberately. This was hers in a way the estate could never be. Not inherited, not obligated, chosen. Dennis Whitmore was waiting in the main office, surrounded by ledgers that he looked up from with obvious relief when Isabel entered. Thank God, he said, which was alarming because Dennis never blasphemed and rarely showed emotion stronger than mild concern. What's wrong? He gestured at the papers spread across the desk. I received a letter this morning from Lydia's solicitor. She's challenging the trust structure and demanding a full audit with the intention of restructuring the board. Isabel went very still. On what grounds? Mismanagement of funds, conflict of interest, unauthorized use of family resources. Dennis's mouth thinned. It's nonsense, obviously. Every penny is accounted for, and you've never taken a salary despite doing the work of 3 administrators. But it doesn't matter if it's nonsense, Isabel finished, already seeing the shape of it. She can drag this through legal challenges long enough to freeze operations and destroy our credibility with donors. Exactly. Isabel crossed to the window, looked out at the village high street. On the corner, she could see the bakery where 2 of their women worked. Across the way, the seamstress shop that employed 3 more. She's not trying to fix anything, Isabel said quietly. She's trying to destroy it. Miss Ashford, Dennis hesitated. What happened this morning? I've received 3 separate messages asking about the situation between you and your sister. So it had spread that quickly. Isabel turned back to face him. Lydia made certain accusations at Sir Reginald's birthday gathering, public ones, about my character and my relationship with her husband. Dennis's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something like anger, which was remarkable because Dennis didn't get angry. And now she's attacking the one thing you've built independently. She's attacking the one thing that matters more than family politics, Isabel corrected, which means I can't afford to respond emotionally. What will you do? Good question. The smart move, the controlled move, would be to negotiate. Find out what Lydia actually wanted. Offer some compromise that satisfied her need for revenge while protecting the trust's operations. But Isabel was suddenly, violently tired of managing other people's emotions at the expense of everything she'd built. I'm going to fight, she said. Dennis blinked. Fight? Gather every account, every impact statement, every piece of documentation that proves this trust works exactly as intended. I want evidence so comprehensive that any attempt to claim mismanagement looks like the malicious fiction it is. Isabel pulled off her gloves, set them on the desk with finality. If Lydia wants a legal battle, she'll get one, but it will be fought on facts, not feelings. That's quite a shift from your usual approach. My usual approach, Isabel said, has been to sacrifice what I want in service of keeping everyone else comfortable. I'm done with that. She meant it. Standing in this office, surrounded by evidence of work that actually mattered, work that helped people instead of just managing them, Isabel felt something clarify that had been building since she'd walked out of Sir Reginald's dining room. She'd spent years trying to control outcomes by controlling herself, giving up Adrian, managing Lydia's fragility, maintaining the estate's reputation, all of it strategic, careful, bloodless. And where had it gotten her? Publicly humiliated by the sister she'd tried to protect, watching the man she loved treat her like a stranger, and now facing the dismantling of the one thing she'd built with actual purpose. Start with the employment record, she told Dennis. I want names, wages, before and after circumstances. Then pull all the education data, attendance rates, progression, outcomes. Finally, the financial statements. 3 years of them, cross-referenced and clear. That's going to take time. Then we'd better start now. Dennis studied her for a long moment, then nodded and began organizing papers. Isabel removed her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and joined him. They worked through lunch and into the late afternoon, interrupted only by Mrs. Perry, one of the trust's first beneficiaries, now its administrative coordinator, bringing tea and asking quiet questions about the morning's drama. "Is it true what they're saying?" Mrs. Perry asked, setting down the tray with careful precision. "About you and Mr. Grayson?" Isabel glanced up from the ledger she was reviewing. "What exactly are they saying?" "Yeah, that you encouraged him to marry Lydia instead, that you gave him up. Would that be so terrible?" Mrs. Perry's expression turned sharp. "Giving someone up because you don't want them? No. Giving someone up because you think you don't deserve them? Or because you're too afraid to fight for what you want?" "Yes, Miss Ashford, that's terrible." Isabel felt the words land with uncomfortable precision. "You built this place," Mrs. Perry continued, gesturing at the office around them. "You gave women like me a chance when no one else would. You did that by being stubborn and difficult and refusing to accept that we were disposable." She paused. "Maybe you should apply the same standard to yourself." Then she left, taking the tea tray with her. Dennis cleared his throat. "She's not wrong. She's also not my employee anymore, technically, so she gets to be honest," Isabel said dryly. But the comment sat in her chest, heavy and true. They returned to work. By the time the winter sun began setting, early, as it did this time of year, they'd assembled a comprehensive picture of the trust's operations. 14 women employed across 6 businesses. 30 children receiving education and meals. 0 deficit, 0 scandal. Just quiet, effective work that had changed lives in measurable ways. Isabel stared at the numbers and felt something like fury building in her chest. Lydia could attack her personally, all she wanted. Could tell the world that Isabel was cold, controlling, had orchestrated her own heartbreak out of some twisted need for martyrdom. Fine, maybe some of that was even true. But this work, these women, these children, they weren't collateral damage in a family dispute. They were real lives, real outcomes, real proof that Isabel could build something that mattered. "Send everything to our solicitor," she told Dennis, "and request a meeting with the full board of trustees. I want this addressed formally before Lydia's challenge gains any momentum." "When?" "Tomorrow, if possible. This weekend at the latest." Isabel began gathering her things. "I'm not giving her time to build a narrative." Dennis nodded, already making notes. Isabel pulled on her coat, stepped out into the twilight, and nearly collided with Adrian Grayson on the front steps. He caught her elbow, steadied her. "Isabel." She jerked back from his touch like it burned. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you." He looked exhausted, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled, tie loosened. "We need to talk." "I don't think that's—" "About this morning," he interrupted. "About what Lydia said, about all of it." Isabel's laugh came out sharp, brittle. "Which part? The public humiliation? The character assassination? Or the part where your wife is currently trying to dismantle the charitable trust I've spent 3 years building?" Adrian's expression shifted. "What?" You didn't know?" Isabel pulled the legal letter from her bag, handed it to him. "She filed this morning, claiming mismanagement and demanding restructuring. Convenient timing, don't you think?" "Base." He scanned the document and something in his face went cold. "This is—" "Isabel, I didn't know. Lydia didn't mention—" "Why would she? This isn't about you." Isabel took the letter back, tucked it away. "This is about her punishing me for crimes I actually committed, using the one weapon she knows will hurt." "What crimes?" Adrian's voice rose. "Loving me? Making a stupid, self-sacrificing choice because you thought it was noble? Bombas. Controlling everyone around me instead of being honest." The words came out louder than she intended, echoing off the brick walls. "You were right 3 years ago. I didn't give you up to save Lydia. I gave you up because staying with you meant admitting I wanted something I couldn't manage or control, meant being vulnerable. meant risking actual failure instead of just engineering strategic retreats. Ose mon nombrachit. She was breathing hard now, fury and shame and 3 years of buried grief all surfacing at once. And then I built this, she gestured at the building behind her, because at least here, I could measure success, could point to actual outcomes instead of just managing everyone's feelings. And now Lydia wants to take that too, and maybe she's entitled to it. Maybe this is just karma for every manipulative choice I've made. Adrian was staring at her. You really believe that? I believe I made my choices and these are the consequences. Isabel straightened her shoulders. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a legal battle to prepare for. She started past him. Isabel, wait. Don't. She turned back and her voice came out flat, empty. You married my sister. I orchestrated it. We both have to live with that. But I'm done sacrificing things that matter to protect people from truths they need to hear. So go home to Lydia. Help her understand that destroying this trust won't fix whatever's broken in your marriage. And let me do what I actually do well. Which is fight for outcomes that matter, using facts, not feelings. She met his eyes. It's the only thing I've ever been good at. Then she walked away, leaving him standing in the gathering dark. The walk back to the estate took 40 minutes, which gave Isabel plenty of time to regret approximately half of what she'd just said. Not the content, that had been true, brutally so, but the delivery, the lack of control, the visible emotion. She'd spent 3 years perfecting a facade of cool competence, and she'd just shattered it in front of the one person who'd always seen through it anyway. Well, too late now. The estate house was dark except for the drawing room windows. Isabel let herself in through the kitchen entrance, hoping to avoid Mrs. Henderson's knowing looks, and made it as far as the stairs before her mother appeared. Catherine Ashford stood in the hallway with the kind of rigid posture that meant she was furious and determined not to show it. Isabel. A word, not a request. Isabel followed her into the drawing room where a fire burned low and a decanter of sherry sat on the side table. Her mother poured 2 glasses without asking, handed one to Isabel. I've heard about this morning, Catherine said. I imagine everyone has. I've also heard about Lydia's legal challenge to your trust. Her mother's voice was carefully neutral. I assume the 2 events are related. Isabel sipped her sherry, said nothing. Catherine studied her for a long moment. You gave him up, didn't you? Adrian, you arranged the whole thing. Yes, because you thought Lydia needed him more. Because I thought she needed saving more than I needed to be happy. Isabel set down her glass. Turns out I was wrong on both counts. Yes. Her mother's expression flickered, something that might have been regret, quickly suppressed. You've always been like your father, brilliant with systems, terrible with people. He used to do the same thing, solve problems by reorganizing everything around him instead of actually addressing what was wrong. Mother, I'm not criticizing. I'm observing. Catherine moved to the fire, stared into it. After he died, I asked you to be strong, to hold everything together. I never asked if you wanted that burden. Isabel went very still. In 20 years, her mother had never acknowledged the weight of what she'd demanded. You were 19, Catherine continued quietly. Still a child, really. And I turned you into the family atlas, holding up the sky while Lydia fell apart, and I pretended everything was manageable. She turned back. I'm sorry for that. The apology landed like a physical blow. It's too late to undo it, her mother said. But it's not too late to stop. Isabel, you've spent years sacrificing yourself for this family. Your trust, your work, that's the first thing you've done purely for yourself. Don't let Lydia take it. And if fighting for it means publicly acknowledging every mistake I've made, every manipulation, or then acknowledge them. Catherine's voice was firm. You're not infallible. You never were. But you're also not a villain. You're a woman who made difficult choices with incomplete information and the weight of everyone's expectations crushing you. That's not crime. It's just being human. Isabel felt something crack in her chest. I don't know how to be human, she said quietly. I only know how to be effective. Then be effectively human. Her mother crossed to her, took her hands. Fight for your trust. Admit your mistakes. Stop trying to control outcomes and just exist. Make choices because you want them, not because they're strategically optimal. What if I make the wrong choice? Then you'll fail honestly instead of succeeding through manipulation. Which would you rather live with? Isabel didn't have an answer. Catherine squeezed her hands once, then released them. There's a board meeting this weekend, yes? If Dennis can arrange it, then prepare your case. And Isabel? Her mother's expression softened. Stop armoring yourself. The trust works because you actually care about it, not because you managed it perfectly. Let that show. Then she left, taking her sherry glass with her. Isabel stood alone in the drawing room, staring into the fire, and felt the weight of 30 years of careful control begin to shift. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe the answer wasn't more strategy, more management, more careful orchestration of outcomes. Maybe it was just truth. Messy, uncomfortable, uncontrolled truth. She'd spent 3 years building a trust that operated on exactly that principle. Honesty about circumstances, realistic assessment of needs, transparent accounting of results. No pretense, no manipulation, just clear-eyed evaluation and practical help. Perhaps it was time to apply the same standard to herself. Isabel finished her sherry, set down the glass, and headed upstairs to begin preparing for the fight of her life. Not the strategic fight, not the carefully managed conflict, the honest one. Isabel woke at 5 the next morning with her mother's words still rattling around in her skull. Stop armoring yourself. Easy advice from someone who'd spent 40 years perfecting the art of emotional distance. Still, Catherine Ashford had managed something Isabel rarely saw. Genuine regret wrapped in practical wisdom. She dressed in the dark, avoiding the mirror until absolutely necessary. When she finally looked, the woman staring back appeared composed enough. Tired eyes, yes, but focused. Ready. The trust offices were empty when she arrived at 6:30, which suited her fine. She needed silence to think clearly, and thinking clearly meant facing exactly how bad this situation could get. Dennis had left 3 folders on her desk. Employment records, education outcomes, financial statements. Isabel spread them out, forcing herself to see them not as evidence of competence but as potential ammunition in Lydia's hands. The problem wasn't the numbers. Those were solid. The problem was narrative. Lydia's solicitor had been clever in the challenge letter. Words like unauthorized use of family resources and conflict of interest didn't need to be true to be damaging. They just needed to sound plausible enough that donors started asking questions, that the women employed here started worrying about job security, that the whole careful structure Isabel had built began to shake, and the timing. Right after the public scene at Sir Reginald's breakfast, it turned the trust challenge into proof of Isabel's character flaws. See how she manipulates charitable work for personal gain, just like she manipulated her own sister's marriage. Isabel pressed her palms flat against the desk, breathed deliberately. The old strategy would have been to negotiate, find out what Lydia actually wanted, public apology, financial compensation, control over some aspect of the trust, and give it to her. Trade Isabel's pride for operational stability. But that would mean admitting culpability where none existed. It would mean sacrificing truth for peace, and Isabel had done that once already with Adrian. Look how well that had worked. The door opened. Isabel looked up, expecting Dennis, and found Adrian instead. He looked worse than yesterday, same rumpled clothes, suggesting he hadn't been home. You didn't answer my messages. I didn't receive any messages. I sent 3 letters through your housekeeper. Mrs. Henderson knows better than to deliver correspondence from married men at 6 in the morning. Isabel turned back to her files. What do you want? I spoke with Lydia last night. How domestic. Isabel. Did she explain why she's trying to destroy my trust? Or was that conversation deemed too emotionally complicated for a Thursday evening? Adrian crossed to the desk, planted both hands on it. She didn't know I was coming here. I told her I was reviewing case files in the city. Isabel finally looked up. You lied to your wife. I'm lying to everyone lately, it seems. His voice was rough. Lydia told me her version of events, about how you orchestrated our marriage, about how she'd always suspected but never had proof until recently. What proof? Well, Carbotan set. Your letters to me, the ones you wrote but never sent. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. She found them in a box in our attic. 14 letters spanning 3 years, each one documenting your reasons for stepping back, your strategies for pushing us together, your rationalization of the whole goddamn manipulation. Isabel's stomach dropped. I burned those. Apparently not thoroughly enough. Adrian unfolded the letter, read aloud. January 15th, 3 years ago. I watched Adrian with Lydia tonight at dinner. She was radiant, the version of herself that exists before the darkness takes hold. He made her laugh. Real laughter, not the brittle kind she performs for Mother and me. If I step back now, perhaps they can build something genuine. Perhaps my absence is the gift they both need. He looked up. You wrote 13 more just like it. Clinical dissections of your own heartbreak dressed up as nobility. The room felt airless. Isabel had written those letters in the months after she'd pushed Adrian toward Lydia, trying to convince herself the sacrifice made sense. She'd thought destroying them would erase the evidence of her calculation. Turned out fire hadn't been hot enough. So now Lydia has proof I'm exactly what she accused me of being, Isabel said quietly. Controlling, manipulative, a woman who treats people like chess pieces. That's not what I said, but it's what the letters prove. She stood, walked to the window. Outside, the village was waking, shopkeepers opening shutters, workers heading to early shifts, normal people with normal problems. She has documentation of my manipulation. She has motive, and now she's using the trust challenge to punish me publicly while appearing to act in the interest of proper governance. It's actually brilliant. It's cruel. It's effective, which is more than I can say for honesty lately. Isabel turned back. Why are you here, Adrian? To warn me? To apologize for your wife's justified revenge? To ask me to surrender quietly? I'm here because I read those letters and realized something. He moved closer, and Isabel fought the urge to step back. You were wrong. About all of it. Lydia didn't need me. She needed professional help, and a family willing to admit she was seriously ill instead of just delicate. I didn't need rescuing from you. I needed you to trust me enough to have an actual conversation about our future instead of making unilateral decisions. And you didn't need to sacrifice yourself. You needed to stop treating love like a resource to be allocated efficiently. Each word landed like a blow. You're right, Isabel said. I was wrong about everything. And now we're living with the consequences. Are we? Adrian's voice dropped. Or are we just continuing the same patterns? You, managing outcomes instead of fighting for what you want. Me, accepting whatever decision has been made instead of demanding better. Lydia, using illness and anger as weapons instead of addressing what's actually broken. What's your point? My point is that you're preparing to defend your trust using facts and figures, which is fine. But the real battle isn't legal, it's personal. And you can't win a personal battle by being strategically correct. He paused. You have to be honest, completely, uncomfortably honest. Isabel laughed, sharp and bitter. About what? My 3-year campaign of manipulation? My control issues? My inability to function like a normal human being with normal emotions? About why you built this trust in the first place. About what it actually means to you. About the fact that you're not defending a charitable organization. You're defending the only place where you've allowed yourself to matter without performance or calculation. Adrian's eyes were fierce. Stop treating this like a board meeting and start treating it like what it is. A fight for your right to exist as something other than your family's atlas. The silence stretched between them. I don't know how to do that, Isabel said finally. Then learn. Because if you show up to that board meeting with spreadsheets and impact reports, you'll win the legal argument and lose everything that matters. Lydia's not attacking your competence. She's attacking your humanity. So defend it, messily, imperfectly, honestly. He left before Isabel could respond, pulling the door shut with enough force to rattle the windows. Isabel stood in the empty office, surrounded by evidence of her competence, and felt the foundations of her strategy crumble. Dennis arrived an hour later with coffee and the grim news that he'd managed to schedule a full board meeting for Saturday afternoon. Tomorrow. Short notice, but that was the point. Strike while Lydia's challenge was still forming, before she could build momentum. Are you ready? Dennis asked, setting down the coffee. Define ready. Do you have a defense prepared? Isabel gestured at the files spread across her desk. I have 3 years of documentation proving fiscal responsibility, measurable outcomes, and zero evidence of mismanagement. That's not what I asked. I know. Isabel picked up her coffee, wrapped both hands around the cup. Adrian was here this morning. He thinks the legal argument isn't enough. He's probably right. Dennis settled into the chair across from her. Miss Ashford, Isabel, I've worked with you for 3 years. I've watched you build this trust from a single house and a bank loan into something that actually changes lives. You're meticulous, demanding, and occasionally ruthless about outcomes. But you're also the only person I've ever met who genuinely believes women like Mrs. Perry deserve second chances backed by real resources. That's just practical. No, it's personal. Dennis leaned forward. You know what it's like to be trapped by circumstances and expectations. You know what it's like to sacrifice yourself because everyone else's needs seem more legitimate than yours. These women, the ones you've employed, trained, supported, they're not charity cases to you. They're proof that breaking free is possible. Isabel set down her coffee cup carefully. You're saying I should make this about me. I'm saying you should stop pretending it's not already about you. The numbers matter, yes, but the board needs to understand why those numbers exist in the first place. Why you, specifically, built this. What you're actually fighting for. Vulnerability as strategy, honesty as foundation. Dennis picked up one of the employment files, opened it. Sarah Mitchell, single mother, 3 children, no formal education. You found her cleaning tables at the pub and convinced the baker to take her on as an apprentice. Now she manages her own shop. She did the work because you saw her, really saw her, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person with potential that circumstances had buried. He set down the file. That's not management, Isabel. That's recognition. You see in these women what you've never let yourself see in yourself. That surviving impossible situations makes you strong, not broken. That choosing to build something meaningful from wreckage is brave, not calculating. Isabel felt her throat tighten. Dennis, tomorrow, when you walk into that boardroom, Lydia's going to attack your character. She's going to use those letters as evidence that you're manipulative and controlling. And if you respond with spreadsheets, you'll prove her point. He stood. But if you respond with truth, the real truth, about why you gave up the man you loved and built this trust in the space he left behind, you might actually change the conversation. Or I might just give her more ammunition. Possibly, but at least you'll fail honestly instead of succeeding through partial truths. Dennis headed for the door, paused. Your mother called this morning. She said to tell you she's attending the board meeting as an observer. Isabel blinked. Mother never attends board meetings. She said some things are worth showing up for, even when it's uncomfortable. He smiled slightly. Apparently honesty is contagious. Then he left, and Isabel was alone with 3 years of carefully documented evidence and the growing suspicion that none of it would be enough. She spent the rest of Friday preparing 2 versions of her defense. The first was pure strategy, numbers, outcomes, legal precedent, clean, professional, unassailable. The second was messier, personal. It included admissions of manipulation, acknowledgement of control issues, and an explanation of why the trust mattered that had nothing to do with charitable impact and everything to do with survival. By Friday evening, Isabel still hadn't decided which version to use. She was sitting in the trust office staring at both speeches when Mrs. Perry appeared in the doorway. You're still here. Isabel glanced up. I could say the same. I was doing inventory. Mrs. Perry crossed to the desk, looked at the papers scattered across it. Planning your defense? Trying to. And? Isabel leaned back in her chair. And I'm discovering that I'm very good at proving competence and terrible at defending humanity. Mrs. Perry studied her for a long moment. Can I tell you something? Please. When you hired me 3 years ago, I was living in a room above the pub with 2 children and no prospects. I'd left my husband because staying meant watching him drink us into complete ruin, but leaving meant admitting I couldn't support my family alone. She paused. You interviewed me in this office. asked about my skills, my situation, my goals, and then you said something I've never forgotten. What did I say? You said, the worst thing about impossible circumstances is that they make you believe you deserve them. You don't. Neither do your children. Let's fix this. Mrs. Perry's voice was steady. That wasn't management, Miss Ashford. That was recognition from someone who understood exactly what impossible circumstances feel like. Isabel felt something crack in her chest. Tomorrow Lydia is going to try to destroy this place, Mrs. Perry continued. Not because it's corrupt or mismanaged, but because it proves you can survive heartbreak and build something meaningful from the pieces. That threatens her narrative about you. She picked up the messier speech, the honest one. So don't fight her with numbers. Fight her with this. Let the board see what we already know. That you built this trust because you needed proof that choosing yourself over strategic martyrdom was possible. She set down the speech and left. Isabel sat in the silence, surrounded by evidence of competence and the growing certainty that competence wouldn't win this fight. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. Isabel dressed carefully, simple wool dress, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back. She looked professional without performing superiority. Good enough. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the estate's formal dining room. Isabel arrived early to find the room already set up. Long table, 12 chairs, folders at each place containing the documentation Dennis had prepared. Her mother was there, standing by the window in severe black silk that made her look like a judge. Isabel, you came. I said I would. Catherine turned. Are you prepared? I have no idea. Good. Certainty would be a warning sign. Her mother crossed to her, adjusted Isabel's collar with quick, practiced movements. Whatever happens today, remember that you built something real. Lydia can challenge its structure, but she can't erase its impact. Hold on to that. Board members began arriving at 1:45. 6 total. 3 local gentry who donated initial funding, 2 clergy who managed community outreach, and Sir Reginald himself, whose presence surprised Isabel until she remembered that his late wife had been passionate about women's education. He'd probably view this challenge as an insult to her memory. Lydia arrived precisely at 2, accompanied by her solicitor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Blackwood, who carried herself like someone who'd won more battles than she'd lost. Adrian wasn't with them, which shouldn't have been surprising, but still felt like abandonment. Lydia looked magnificent, pale blue dress that highlighted her delicate features, hair perfectly arranged, expression serene. She looked like a woman wronged who'd found the strength to seek justice. Isabel had to admire the performance even as she resented it. Dennis called the meeting to order. Standard opening procedures, reading of Lydia's formal challenge, opportunity for initial statements. Ms. Blackwood stood first. Thank you for convening on short notice. My client, Mrs. Lydia Grayson, has raised serious concerns about the Ashford Women's Trust and its management. Specifically, she alleges unauthorized use of family funds, conflict of interest in the appointment of beneficiaries, and a pattern of decision-making that prioritizes Miss Ashford's personal agenda over genuine charitable purpose. She laid out the case with surgical precision. The trust had been funded initially with estate resources. Isabel served as chair without oversight. Several beneficiaries had personal connections to Isabel that suggested favoritism rather than merit-based selection. And most damaging, the recent revelation of letters proving Isabel's manipulative tendencies raised questions about her true motivations. Mrs. Grayson is not seeking to destroy the trust, Ms. Blackwood concluded. She simply wants proper governance and transparency, a restructured board, independent oversight, and clear separation between the Ashford family's interests and the trust's mission. Sounded reasonable, measured, exactly the kind of argument designed to make Isabel's defense look like selfish resistance to accountability. Dennis stood. Miss Ashford has prepared a comprehensive response to these allegations. I'll turn the floor over to her. Isabel rose slowly, gathering the papers she'd brought, both versions of her defense. She looked around the table, board members watching with varying degrees of sympathy and skepticism, her mother's face carefully neutral, Lydia's expression serene and dangerous. She set down the strategic version, picked up the honest one. 3 years ago, Isabel began, I made a choice that I believed was noble. I gave up the man I loved because I thought my sister needed him more. I orchestrated their meeting, engineered situations that drew them together, and systematically removed myself from his life until he had no choice but to turn to Lydia instead. Lydia's serenity flickered. It was manipulative, Isabel continued. Controlling, arrogant, really, to assume I knew what everyone needed better than they knew themselves. But I want to be clear about my motivation. I didn't do it out of spite or calculation. I did it because I was 19 years old when my father died and left this estate drowning in debt, and my mother looked at me and said, "You'll have to be strong enough for both of them now." Both meaning Lydia and herself then. She could feel the room's attention shift. So I became strong in the only way I knew how. I learned to manage money, land, people. I learned to make hard choices look easy. I learned to sacrifice what I wanted in service of what everyone else needed, and I got very, very good at it. Isabel paused, looked directly at Lydia. When I met Adrian, I was 23 and exhausted. He was the first person who saw through the competence to the woman underneath. And that terrified me, because if I admitted I wanted him, if I chose myself over strategic necessity, everything I'd built might collapse. So I gave him away. Convinced myself it was noble, wrote 14 letters trying to rationalize the decision. Letters my client discovered, Ms. Blackwood interjected, proving systematic manipulation. Gates, some laws. Yes, Isabel agreed. They prove exactly that. They also prove that I spent 3 years trying to convince myself that sacrifice was the same as strength. It's not. It's just cowardice dressed up as nobility. Lydia stood abruptly. This is... Let her finish, Sir Reginald said quietly. Isabel took a breath. After I pushed Adrian toward Lydia, I needed something to fill the space he'd occupied. So I created this trust. Initially, I told myself it was pure altruism, helping women in difficult circumstances, providing education and employment, making a difference. But the truth is messier than that. She picked up one of the employment files. I built this trust because I needed proof that choosing yourself over strategic martyrdom was survivable, that women, including me, deserved resources and second chances, and the ability to build lives that weren't dictated by other people's needs. Every woman I hired, every child I helped educate, was evidence that breaking free from impossible circumstances was possible. Isabel set down the file, met the board's eyes one by one. Was that selfish? Probably. Was I managing these women's lives as a proxy for managing my own? Almost certainly. But here's what I know for absolute fact. In 3 years, this trust has employed 14 women at fair wages, educated 30 children, operated at zero deficit, created measurable, documented improvement in 15 families' circumstances. You have the numbers in front of you. They're real. Numbers can be manipulated, Ms. Blackwood said. Not like this. Dennis stood, pulled out additional documentation. Every penny is accounted for, every hiring decision documented, every outcome measured. Miss Ashford runs this trust with the same ruthless efficiency she applies to everything else. It works because she's demanding and precise and refuses to accept mediocrity. It works because she's controlling, Lydia said, voice shaking now. Just like she controlled my marriage, my husband, my entire life. The room went silent. Isabel looked at her sister, really looked at her for the first time in years, and saw not the serene performance but the rage beneath it. The justified, furious rage of someone who'd been managed and manipulated by a sister who'd believed she knew better. You're right, Isabel said quietly. I controlled you. I made decisions about your life without asking what you actually wanted. I treated you like someone who needed saving instead of someone who deserved honesty. And I'm sorry. Mitabastati, Lydia blinked, clearly not expecting that. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth about my relationship with Adrian. I'm sorry I orchestrated your marriage instead of trusting you to make your own choices. I'm sorry I've spent our entire lives believing my strength meant managing your weakness instead of just being your sister. Isabel's voice steadied. But my mistakes with you, however serious, don't justify destroying work that helps people who had nothing to do with our family drama. This isn't about destroying anything, Lydia shot back. It's about accountability. About making sure you can't use charity as another way to control outcomes and avoid consequences. Then hold me accountable for what I actually did. Demand apologies. Cut me out of your life. Expose every manipulation I've committed. But don't dismantle a trust that works because you're angry at me. The women and children who depend on this organization didn't manipulate you. They don't deserve to be collateral damage. Ms. Blackwood stood. My client has every right to demand proper oversight of an organization funded with family resources. Family resources that I earned, Isabel countered. Every penny that went into this trust came from estate profits that I generated through my management. Lydia contributed nothing financially. Neither did Mother. The trust exists because I built it with my work. Work you did while serving as estate manager, Ms. Blackwood pressed, creating potential conflict of interest, IPOs, which I addressed by maintaining completely separate accounts and ensuring zero financial overlap. Dennis can verify that every transaction has been documented and legitimate. There is no conflict of interest. There's just Lydia's desire for revenge wrapped in the language of governance. The room erupted. Board members talking over each other. Ms. erupted. Board. Blackwood demanding order, Lydia's face gone white with fury. Sir Reginald's fist hit the table with enough force to rattle the water glasses. Enough! Silence fell. Miss Ashford, he said slowly, you've admitted to serious character flaws, manipulation of your sister's marriage, control issues, strategic sacrifice that hurt everyone involved. Why should we believe the trust hasn't been similarly corrupted? Isabel met his eyes. Because the trust is the one place I stopped trying to control outcomes and started fighting for them. I didn't manipulate these women into employment. I gave them opportunities and demanded they rise to meet them. I didn't manage their lives. I provided resources and expected results. And when they failed, I didn't rescue them. I held them accountable. She pulled out Mrs. Perry's file, handed it to Sir Reginald. Sarah Mitchell failed her first 3 months. Couldn't manage the schedule, struggled with the work, nearly quit. I didn't save her. I told her she had 2 weeks to improve or she was done. She improved. Now she runs her own bakery and employs 2 others. That's not manipulation. That's standards. Sir Reginald read the file, passed it to the board member next to him. I'm not a perfect person, Isabel continued. I'm controlling, calculating, and occasionally ruthless. But I'm also competent, demanding, and committed to outcomes that matter. This trust works not despite my flaws, but because of them. Because I refuse to accept failure, and I hold everyone, including myself, to the same brutal standard. She looked at Lydia. You want to punish me? Fine. I deserve it. But punish me for what I actually did. Don't use this trust as a weapon. Don't destroy something real because you're angry at someone flawed. Lydia stood slowly. You think you can just admit your mistakes and erase the consequences? No. I think I can acknowledge them and fight for what matters anyway. Isabel's voice didn't waver. You have every right to hate me, to expose my manipulation, to demand accountability. But you don't have the right to use that anger to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. Those people exist because you needed validation. They exist because they needed opportunity. Isabel's control finally cracked. Yes, I built this trust partly for myself, to prove I could choose something meaningful instead of just managing everyone else's needs. But the fact that it served my purposes doesn't erase the fact that it serves theirs too. 14 women have jobs. 30 children have education. That's real. It matters. And you don't get to erase it, because I'm not the perfect martyr you wanted me to be. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Ms. Blackwood cleared her throat. The board needs to consider all evidence before making a determination. I've heard enough evidence, Sir Reginald interrupted. He looked at the other board members. We have 3 options. Dismantle the trust entirely, restructure with new leadership, or maintain current operations with enhanced oversight. I'm calling for a vote. We need more time, Ms. Blackwood began. We need honesty, Sir Reginald cut her off, which we've finally gotten. Miss Ashford is controlling, manipulative, and flawed. She's also built something that works. The question is whether her personal failures disqualify her from continuing work that demonstrably helps people. I'm voting no. Her character may be questionable, but her competence is not. One by one, board members voted. 4 for maintaining operations, 1 for restructuring, 1 abstention. The trust stood. Lydia's face went absolutely blank. Then she turned and walked out without a word, Ms. Blackwood following with her briefcase and her carefully prepared arguments rendered useless. Isabel stood at the head of the table, hands shaking, breathing hard, and felt something fundamental shift in her chest. She'd won, not through strategy or management or careful orchestration, through messy, uncomfortable, completely honest truth. Dennis caught her eye across the table, nodded once. Her mother's expression held something that might have been pride. Sir Reginald began gathering his papers. Miss Ashford, a word. Isabel followed him into the hallway, where he turned to face her with the kind of stern expression that probably terrified younger board members. That was the worst defense I've ever heard, he said. Isabel's stomach dropped. And the most effective, he continued. You didn't try to be perfect. You admitted fault and defended impact anyway. That takes courage. He paused. My wife would have liked you. She also believed women deserve second chances backed by real resources, not just charitable sympathy. Thank you, sir. Mpa. Don't thank me. Just keep doing the work. And Miss Ashford? His expression softened slightly. Consider applying the same standard of honest accountability to your personal life. You might be surprised by the results. Then he left, and Isabel was alone in the hallway with the wreckage of her carefully controlled image and the fragile, terrifying possibility that honesty might actually be survivable. She found Adrian waiting outside, leaning against his carriage with his arms crossed and an expression she couldn't read. You didn't come in, Isabel said. Lydia asked me not to. She said it would be a conflict of interest. He pushed off the carriage. How did it go? I won. The trust stands. And Lydia? Left without speaking to me. I imagine she's furious, and Adrian nodded slowly. She's also humiliated. She tried to destroy you publicly and failed. That's going to have consequences. For which marriage? Yours or mine with competence? His mouth twitched. Both, probably. He moved closer. You told the truth in there. Most of it. What? All of it. From what I heard through the door. Adrian's eyes were steady. About manipulation, about sacrifice, about building the trust as proof that choosing yourself was survivable. That couldn't have been easy. It was terrifying, Isabel admitted. Every instinct I have screamed to defend strategically, not honestly. But turns out honesty was more effective. Honesty usually is. We just convince ourselves otherwise because it's scarier. They stood in the cold afternoon light, and Isabel felt the weight of 3 years of lies and manipulation sitting between them like a physical presence. I need to end my marriage, Adrian said quietly. Isabel's breath caught. Not because of you, he continued, because it was built on manipulation and maintained through denial. Lydia deserves a husband who chose her honestly, not one who was maneuvered into place. And I deserve... He trailed off. What do you deserve? The chance to make real choices instead of accepting whatever's been decided for me. He met her eyes. You said in those letters that stepping back was the gift we needed. You were wrong. The gift would have been trusting us enough to have an actual conversation about what we wanted. I know that now. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you just spent 3 years building proof that choosing yourself is survivable, but you still haven't actually chosen anything. You defended the trust, admitted your mistakes, but you haven't made a single move toward what you actually want. Isabel felt the words land with brutal accuracy. What do you want me to say? Nothing. I want you to choose, actively. Not as strategy or sacrifice or careful calculation, just as yourself, wanting something and fighting for it. Adrian stepped back. When you figure out how to do that, come find me. Until then, I have a marriage to end honestly, instead of letting it decay through mutual pretense. So what? He climbed into the carriage and drove away, leaving Isabel standing in the winter afternoon with her victory and her loneliness and the terrifying realization that winning the fight for her trust had only exposed how many other battles she'd been avoiding. Isabel stood there for 10 minutes after Adrian's carriage disappeared, frozen like she'd been nailed to the gravel drive. The cold finally drove her inside, but the numbness stayed. When you figure out how to choose, come find me. She made it to her study before the shaking started. Not tears. Isabel hadn't cried since her father's funeral, but a physical tremor that ran from her hands up through her shoulders. She gripped the edge of her desk and forced herself to breathe. The trust had survived. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like she'd won the wrong battle while the real war continued somewhere she couldn't see clearly enough to fight. A knock at the door. Mrs. Henderson entered without waiting for permission, which meant something was seriously wrong. "Your sister is here, Pat," the housekeeper said flatly. "She's in the front hall demanding to see you. I told her you weren't receiving visitors, but she said if you didn't come down, she'd make enough noise to wake the entire county." Isabel straightened. "Send her up." "Miss Ashford, if we're going to have this confrontation, I'd prefer it happen in private rather than where the staff can hear every word." Mrs. Henderson's mouth thinned, but she nodded and withdrew. Lydia swept in 2 minutes later looking like a storm wrapped in silk. Her earlier serenity had shattered completely, replaced by something raw and dangerous. "You humiliated me," she said without preamble. "You tried to destroy my trust. I tried to hold you accountable." Lydia's voice climbed. "For 3 years of manipulation, for treating my marriage like a chess game, for every single choice you made that prioritized your control over everyone else's agency." "Well, sis, I admitted all of that. In front of the entire board, I owned every mistake. And then you turned it into proof of your strength." Lydia crossed to the window, whirled back. "You stood there and confessed to manipulation, and somehow you made it sound noble, like your awareness of your flaws excuses them. Like admitting you're controlling means you get to keep controlling everything." The accusation hit harder than Isabel expected because it was partially true. She had wielded honesty like a weapon, using confession to defuse Lydia's attack while maintaining her position. "What do you want from me?" Isabel asked quietly. "I want you to lose something that matters." Lydia's composure cracked completely. "You gave away Adrian 3 years ago and built yourself a consolation prize. You admitted your mistakes and got praised for your honesty. You keep sacrificing and strategizing, and somehow you always land on your feet while everyone around you just suffers the consequences of your choices. You think I landed on my feet? You still have your trust. Your reputation as the brilliant, demanding Isabel Ashford who helps poor, unfortunate women. Your image as someone too strong to need anything as common as love or vulnerability." Lydia's hands were shaking. "Meanwhile, I have a husband who looks at me and sees a mistake. A marriage built on your manipulation that I can't escape without admitting I was too weak to deserve real choice. And a family that will always see me as the fragile one who needed saving." Isabel felt something crack open in her chest. "Lydia, do you know what Adrian said to me last night after he read your letters?" Lydia's voice dropped to something dangerous. He said he was ending our marriage. Not because of you specifically, but because neither of us chose this honestly, and we both deserve better. As if I'm supposed to be grateful that he's leaving me for the sake of my dignity. He's leaving you. He moved his things to a hotel this morning, filed papers with his solicitor by noon. By next week, the entire county will know that the Grayson marriage failed because the bride was a substitute for her sister. Lydia laughed, sharp and bitter. "So congratulations, Isabel. You get to win by losing. Again." The words hung between them like smoke from a fire that wouldn't quite catch. Isabel moved to the sideboard, poured 2 glasses of brandy without asking, and handed one to Lydia. Her sister took it automatically. "You're right," Isabel said. "I've spent my entire life turning losses into strategic victories. Losing father meant learning to manage the estate. Losing Adrian meant building the trust. Every time something breaks me, I find a way to make it look like strength." She drank her brandy in one burning swallow. "But you're wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "I didn't win today. I just stopped pretending failure was impossible. Isabel set down her glass. The board voted to keep the trust because the work is real, not because I'm admirable. Sir Reginald called my defense the worst he'd ever heard. And Adrian told me to come find him when I figure out how to choose something honestly, which we both know might never happen. Lydia studied her with something that might have been surprise. You actually care what he thinks. I care that he's right. I've spent 3 years building proof that I could survive choosing myself, but I still haven't actually chosen anything. I'm still managing outcomes, just with different tools. So what are you going to do about it? I have no idea. Isabel met her sister's eyes. But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to manage your feelings about Adrian leaving. I'm not going to try to fix your reputation or strategize your next move. You're angry and hurt and humiliated, and you have every right to be. But you're also not fragile. You never were. That was just the story we told ourselves because it was easier than admitting you were angry. Lydia went very still. What? You weren't depressed after Father died. You were furious. At him for leaving us with impossible debt. At Mother for immediately making it our problem. At me for accepting responsibility so competently that you never got the chance to. Isabel's voice was steady. But anger wasn't allowed for the delicate younger daughter. So it turned into melancholy and panic attacks and all the symptoms we could treat with rest and management instead of the truth. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Lydia, you just tried to destroy my trust using legal strategy and public humiliation. That's not the action of someone too fragile to function. That's rage deployed with precision. Isabel paused. And I think you've been furious at me for years, but neither of us could admit it because I was too busy being strong and you were too busy being saved. The silence stretched so long Isabel thought Lydia might leave without responding. Then her sister laughed. Real laughter, ragged around the edges. I hate that you're right, Lydia said finally. I hate that even now, you're the one who sees clearly while I'm still pretending. She drained her brandy. I was furious when you pushed Adrian toward me. Furious that you thought I needed a husband more than you deserved happiness. Furious that everyone believed I was too delicate to be angry about it. So why didn't you refuse him? Because part of me wanted to prove I could take something you wanted, that I wasn't just the weak sister who needed protection. Lydia set down her glass with enough force to crack the base. Lydia sat down, and then I spent 3 years married to a man who was kind and patient and completely wrong for me, unable to admit it, because that would mean admitting you'd been manipulative and I'd been complicit. Isabel absorbed this, feeling the foundations of their entire relationship shift. We're both terrible at honesty, she said quietly. We learn from experts. Lydia moved toward the door, paused. I'm not going to apologize for trying to destroy your trust. I'm not sorry I exposed your manipulation, but I am tired of being angry without acknowledging it, of playing fragile when I'm just furious, of letting you manage my life because it's easier than taking responsibility for my own choices. What will you do? I don't know yet, but it won't involve you strategizing my next move. Lydia pulled on her gloves. And Isabel? When Adrian said to come find him when you figure out how to choose honestly, he meant it. But he also meant choose quickly, because he's not going to wait forever while you calculate the optimal outcome. Then she left, and Isabel was alone with the truth that her sister had just been more honest than she'd managed in 30 years of careful control. The next week passed in a blur of activity that felt suspiciously like avoidance. Isabel threw herself into trust work, reviewing accounts, meeting with beneficiaries, planning expansion that the board's vote now allowed. She was efficient, demanding, and completely unable to sleep more than 4 hours a night. Dennis noticed but said nothing, which was worse than commentary. On Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Perry appeared in Isabel's office with tea and the kind of expression that meant she was about to say something Isabel wouldn't want to hear. You're avoiding something, Mrs. Perry said, setting down the tea tray. I'm working. You're hiding in work because it's measurable and controllable, and whatever you're avoiding is neither. Mrs. Perry settled into the chair across from the desk. It's Mr. Grayson, isn't it? You still haven't gone to see him. Isabel didn't bother denying it. He said to come when I figure out how to choose honestly. I haven't figured that out yet. What's there to figure out? You want him. He wants you. The obstacles that prevented it before are gone. The obstacles are not gone. Lydia is still hurt. Adrian is still ending a marriage I engineered. And I'm still the woman who manipulates outcomes instead of accepting uncertainty. So you're going to let fear of imperfection prevent you from trying? Mrs. Perry's voice was gentle but firm. Miss Ashford, you told me 3 years ago that the worst thing about impossible circumstances is believing you deserve them. You were talking about my situation, but maybe you should listen to your own advice. This is different. How? Isabel opened her mouth, closed it. Because the truth was, it wasn't different. She was treating her own happiness like an impossible circumstance, something to be managed and controlled rather than chosen and fought for. What if I choose wrong? Isabel said quietly. What if I go to Adrian and it doesn't work? What if honesty isn't enough to fix what I broke? Then you fail honestly instead of succeeding through avoidance. Mrs. Perry stood. But you won't know until you try. And sitting here calculating optimal outcomes is just another way of controlling something that can't be controlled. She left before Isabel could respond. Isabel sat in the silence, surrounded by ledgers and impact reports, and felt the weight of 3 years of strategic avoidance pressing against her chest. Mrs. Perry was right. Isabel had spent a week throwing herself into work, convincing herself she was waiting for the right moment or the perfect clarity, when really she was just terrified of making a choice that couldn't be undone or managed. She pulled out a piece of paper, began writing. Not a letter. Those had caused enough damage. Just a list of truths she needed to say out loud to someone other than herself. I love you. I have for 3 years. I was wrong to give you up. I was wrong to engineer your marriage. I was wrong to prioritize control over honesty. I don't know if we can fix what I broke, but I want to try. Not strategically, not carefully, just honestly. Isabel stared at the words, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. Then she stood, pulled on her coat, and walked out of the office before she could talk herself into calculating a better approach. Adrian's hotel was a 40-minute walk, which gave Isabel plenty of time to panic, and precisely 0 opportunity to turn back, because turning back would mean walking past the trust offices and explaining to Mrs. Perry why she'd failed before even trying. The hotel clerk looked uncertain when Isabel asked for Mr. Grayson's room number. I'm afraid I can't give out that information, miss. Then send someone up to ask if he'll see Isabel Ashford. The clerk's expression shifted to recognition. Apparently the Ashford sisters' drama had spread beyond the county line. He dispatched a bellboy while Isabel waited in the lobby, trying not to let her hands shake visibly. The bellboy returned 5 minutes later. Mr. Grayson says you can go up, room 412. Isabel climbed 4 flights of stairs because waiting for the elevator would have given her time to reconsider, and reconsidering would lead straight back to strategic avoidance. Adrian opened the door before she could knock. He looked like he'd been working, shirt sleeves rolled up, papers spread across the desk, the kind of controlled chaos that meant he was thinking through something complicated. Isabel? Can I come in? He stepped back without a word. The room was small but well-appointed. Bed, desk, chairs by the window. Evidence of temporary residence rather than permanent dwelling. Isabel's chest tightened at the sight of it. I've been expecting you, Adrian said, closing the door. Though I wasn't sure you'd actually show up. I wasn't sure either. What changed? Isabel pulled out the paper she'd written, handed it to him. I stopped trying to figure out the optimal approach and just wrote down the truth. Adrian read it, and something in his expression shifted. This is a start. Only a start? You've identified what you want. Now you have to actually choose it. He set down the paper. Isabel, I meant what I said. I'm ending my marriage to Lydia because it was built on manipulation and maintained through denial. But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because staying would be dishonest. I know that. Do you? Because I need you to understand that whatever happens between us has to be separate from the wreckage of what came before. I can't be the consolation prize you choose because the alternative is loneliness. I can't be another outcome you manage. Isabel felt the words land like blows. Then what can you be? A choice you make because you want me. Not because I'm strategically optimal, or because sacrificing me failed the first time. Just because you want me, imperfect and complicated and uncertain as that is. And if I make that choice and it fails, then we fail together honestly, instead of succeeding separately through carefully managed avoidance. Adrian moved closer. But you have to actually make the choice, Isabel. Not calculate it or strategize it or convince yourself it's noble. Just choose. Isabel looked at him, this man she'd loved and lost and destroyed in service of control she didn't actually have, and felt something fundamental shift in her chest. All her life, she'd treated choice like a math problem. Calculate the variables, identify the optimal outcome, execute with precision. And it had worked, mostly, until it left her standing in a hotel room at 30 years old, terrified to want something she couldn't control. I choose you, she said, not because it's strategic or noble or carefully calculated, just because I want you and I'm tired of pretending that's not enough reason. The silence that followed felt like standing on a cliff edge. Then Adrian crossed the space between them and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or careful or strategically optimal. It was 3 years of buried grief and fury and want finally breaking through every defense Isabel had spent her life constructing. She kissed him back with the kind of desperate honesty that came from choosing something without knowing if it would work. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. That was a choice, he said quietly. Was it the right one? I don't know, but it was honest. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, which is more than we've managed before. Isabel laughed, shaky and real. So what happens now? Now we figure out how to build something real instead of something strategic. Adrian moved to the window, looked out at the street below. But Isabel, you need to understand something. I'm ending my marriage to Lydia, but that's going to take time. Legal process, public spectacle. And through all of it, you and I can't be seen together, or it will look like exactly what Lydia accused you of, manipulating her marriage for your own gain. The practical reality crashed down like cold water. How long? Isabel asked. Months. Maybe longer if Lydia contests it. She won't contest. She told me she's tired of being complicit in pretending. Even so, the legal process has its own timeline. Adrian turned back to face her. Can you wait? Without strategizing or managing outcomes? Just wait. And trust that this is worth it? Isabel wanted to say yes immediately. Wanted to promise she could manage uncertainty with the same competence she applied to everything else. But that would be falling back into old patterns, treating waiting like a project to be executed rather than a choice to be lived with. I don't know, she said honestly. I've never been good at waiting without controlling the outcome. Then we'll learn together. Adrian crossed back to her, took her hands. But I need you to promise me something. Chicky. What? Don't build me another consolation prize. Don't throw yourself into trust work or estate management or any other project that lets you avoid feeling uncertain. Just sit with the uncertainty. Let it be uncomfortable, and trust that we can survive the discomfort. Isabel felt her throat tighten. That's asking me to fundamentally change how I function. I know, but Isabel, if we're going to try this, really try. It can't be another thing you manage. It has to be something you experience, messily, imperfectly, without guarantees. His grip on her hands tightened. Can you do that? Every instinct Isabel had screamed no. Screamed that uncertainty led to chaos, and chaos led to the kind of collapse she'd spent 30 years preventing. But those same instincts had led her to give Adrian away 3 years ago. Believing control was safer than risk. Look how well that had worked. I can try, she said. I'll probably fail at it repeatedly. I'll probably default to strategizing and managing whenever I get scared. But I'll try. That's all I'm asking. He kissed her again, slower this time, and Isabel let herself feel it without calculating what came next. When she finally left the hotel an hour later, the sun was setting and her carefully controlled world felt like it had tilted on its axis. She'd made a choice, an honest, unstrategic, potentially disastrous choice, and she had no idea if it would work. The uncertainty was terrifying. It was also, Isabel realized as she walked home through the winter evening, the first time in years she'd felt fully alive instead of just efficiently functional. The next morning brought a letter from Lydia's solicitor. Isabel opened it, expecting legal maneuvering around the trust, but the contents were far worse. Miss Ashford, my client has instructed me to inform you that she is contesting the dissolution of her marriage on grounds of emotional distress caused by your interference. She is prepared to present evidence of your long-standing manipulation, including the recovered letters, and to argue that any attempt by Mr. Grayson to end the marriage constitutes abandonment influenced by your continued pursuit. Furthermore, she is filing a separate claim against you personally for damages related to emotional harm. Please contact our office to arrange proper legal representation. Isabel read it twice, feeling ice spread through her chest. Lydia wasn't letting go quietly. She was going to war, not just against Adrian's divorce petition, but against Isabel herself. And she had evidence. 14 letters documenting manipulation, plus whatever testimony she could provide about Isabel's interference. The smart move would be to back away from Adrian completely. Let him pursue the divorce without Isabel's visible involvement. Avoid any appearance of continued manipulation. But backing away would mean defaulting to strategic avoidance, would mean letting fear of consequences prevent honest choice, would mean proving Lydia right, that Isabel would always choose control over risk. Isabel set down the letter and walked to the trust offices, where Dennis was already reviewing morning correspondence. I need legal counsel, she said without preamble. Personal counsel, separate from the trust. Lydia is filing suit for damages related to emotional harm from my manipulation of her marriage. Dennis looked up sharply. Can she prove damages? She has my letters. She can testify to emotional distress. And if Adrian's divorce petition looks like it was influenced by my continued involvement, she can argue abandonment caused by my interference. Isabel sat down heavily. It's actually a solid case. What are you going to do? Fight. Honestly. Isabel met his eyes, which means admitting to manipulation while arguing that my current choices are separate from past mistakes. It means acknowledging I caused harm while refusing to let that harm prevent me from choosing differently now. That's going to be legally complicated. Everything about this is complicated. Isabel stood, moved to the window. But I'm done choosing strategic retreat over honest risk. Lydia deserves accountability for the harm I caused, but she doesn't get to use that harm to prevent me from making better choices now. Dennis nodded slowly. I'll find you a solicitor, someone who specializes in these kinds of cases. Thank you, Set. She was turning to leave when Dennis spoke again. Miss Ashford, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Not the safe one, but the right one. Isabel managed a tight smile. Let's hope right and safe aren't as mutually exclusive as they feel. The solicitor Dennis found was a woman named Margaret Chen, who specialized in cases involving family conflict and emotional damages. She reviewed Lydia's filing with the kind of calm precision that reminded Isabel uncomfortably of herself. Your sister has a case, Margaret said, setting down the papers. The letters prove manipulation. Her testimony will establish emotional harm, and if she can demonstrate that your current relationship with Mr. Grayson constitutes continued interference, she can argue for substantial damages. How substantial? Enough to cripple you financially, possibly enough to force sale of estate assets. Margaret paused. But she has weaknesses too. Such as she was a willing participant in the marriage. She accepted Mr. Grayson's proposal knowing you'd introduce them. She maintained the relationship for 3 years without complaint. And crucially, she's the one who made your manipulation public at Sir Reginald's birthday gathering, which could be argued as her own form of strategic revenge. Isabel felt a flicker of hope. So we can fight this. Mamá, ¿cómo estás? We can try. But Miss Ashford, you need to understand something. Margaret leaned forward. Fighting this means exposing every mistake you've made, every manipulation, every calculated choice. The defense requires proving you've changed, which means admitting exactly who you were. Are you prepared for that level of public scrutiny? Isabel thought about Adrian's words. You have to choose. Not strategically, just honestly. Yes, she said. I'm prepared. even if it destroys your reputation? My reputation is built on competence and control. If I have to sacrifice that to prove I'm capable of honest choice, then that's what I'll do. Margaret studied her for a long moment. All right, then we build a defense based on acknowledgement and change. You admit to manipulation. You accept responsibility for harm caused. But you argue that past mistakes don't preclude present growth, and that Lydia's attempt to control your current choices mirrors the same pattern she's accusing you of. Can we win? Honestly, I don't know, but we can make it expensive enough for her that she might reconsider. Margaret began making notes. I'll need complete documentation. Every interaction with your sister over the past 5 years. Timeline of your relationship with Mr. Grayson. Evidence of the trust work as demonstration of changed priorities. And Miss Ashford? Yes? You'll need to testify, which means sitting in front of a judge and admitting to manipulation under oath while arguing you've changed. It will not be comfortable. Isabel thought about the board meeting, about standing in front of people she respected and confessing to control issues and strategic sacrifice. It had been the most terrifying thing she'd done, and it had also been the moment everything started to shift. I can handle uncomfortable, she said. News of Lydia's suit spread through the county within days. Isabel started receiving letters, some supportive, most coolly distant, a few outright condemnatory. She read them all without responding, feeling the weight of public judgment settle across her shoulders like a familiar coat. The trust work continued. Isabel showed up every day, met with beneficiaries, reviewed accounts. She was efficient and demanding and completely unable to sleep through the night without waking in cold panic about how badly this could go. Adrian sent a note through Mrs. Henderson. Don't retreat. I'm still here. Isabel read it approximately 40 times before tucking it away in her desk drawer with the list of truths she'd written before going to his hotel. On the 3rd week of legal preparations, Isabel received an unexpected visitor at the estate. Sir Reginald appeared in the drawing room unannounced, looking grim. Miss Ashford, we need to talk about the trust. Isabel's stomach dropped. If this is about Lydia's suit, it's about the optics. Sir Reginald settled into a chair without being invited. Several board members have expressed concern that your ongoing legal troubles reflect poorly on the organization. They're asking whether you should step down as chair until the matter is resolved. The words hit like a physical blow. I see, Isabel managed. I told them no, Sir Reginald continued. The trust works because you run it with brutal competence. Your personal failings are separate from your professional effectiveness. But I'm in the minority on this. How much of a minority? 4-2. They're calling for a vote next week. Isabel stood, walked to the window to hide the fact that her hands were shaking. First Adrian, then Lydia's lawsuit. Now the trust itself hanging in the balance. Every foundation of her carefully constructed life was being tested simultaneously. What should I do? She asked quietly. Fight, the same way you fought at the board meeting. Sir Reginald's voice was firm. Admit your mistakes. Defend your work. Trust that competence and honesty can coexist even when it's uncomfortable. And if the board votes to remove me anyway, then you appeal. You fight harder. You refuse to let fear of failure prevent you from defending something that matters. He stood. Miss Ashford, you've spent your life trying to be perfect. It's made you effective but isolated. Maybe it's time to try being imperfect and connected instead. He left before Isabel could respond. She stood at the window, looking out at the winter landscape, and felt the full weight of every choice she'd made crashing down at once. Lydia's lawsuit threatened her finances and reputation. The board vote threatened her trust. And Adrian's divorce proceedings meant months of waiting while every decision was scrutinized for evidence of continued manipulation. The old Isabel would have strategized, would have calculated optimal outcomes and executed with precision, would have sacrificed something, probably Adrian again, to protect the trust in her reputation. But the old strategies had led her here, to loneliness wrapped in competence, to control that prevented connection, to victories that felt like losses. Isabel pulled out the paper where she'd written her truth to Adrian. Read it again. I choose you, not strategically, just honestly. Then she sat down and began writing a second truth. This one addressed to the board. I am guilty of manipulation, of treating people like outcomes to be managed rather than humans deserving agency. I orchestrated my sister's marriage, built a trust partly for my own validation, and spent 30 years prioritizing control over honesty. These are facts, but they are not the complete story. The trust works not despite my flaws, but because the same drive that makes me controlling also makes me refuse to accept failure. I am demanding, difficult, and occasionally ruthless. I am also effective. The question is whether my personal failings disqualify me from work that demonstrably helps people. I don't believe they should, but I will accept whatever decision you make. Honestly. She read it twice, feeling her heart hammer. Then she sealed it and sent it with Mrs. Henderson to be delivered to every board member before the vote. The night before the board vote, Isabel couldn't sleep. She gave up trying at 3 a.m. and walked to the trust offices, letting herself in with her key. The building was dark and silent. Isabel lit a lamp in her office and sat at the desk, surrounded by evidence of 3 years of work that might be taken away tomorrow. A noise from the main room made her look up. Lydia stood in the doorway, still wearing evening clothes like she'd come straight from somewhere else. I bribed your housekeeper for your location, Lydia said. She seemed concerned about you. Join the crowd. Lydia moved into the office, looked around at the files and ledgers. This is what you built after giving up Adrian. Yes. It's impressive, genuinely. Lydia sat down across from Isabel. Which is why I'm withdrawing the lawsuit. Isabel went very still. What? I'm dropping the claim for damages, telling my solicitor to stand down. Lydia's voice was tired but steady. Not because I forgive you, not because I think you deserve mercy, but because I finally understand what you were trying to tell me. What's that? That being angry doesn't make me weak, that I've been complicit in my own management by accepting the narrative of fragility. Lydia pulled off her gloves with sharp, precise movements. I spent 3 years being furious at you while pretending to be a devoted wife. Furious at Adrian for being kind without being right. Furious at Mother for expecting me to be grateful for manipulation disguised as care, and I channeled all that fury into trying to destroy you. You had every right. Maybe. But here's what I realized. Lydia leaned forward. If I destroy you to punish manipulation, I'm just using different tools to accomplish the same thing. Control disguised as justice. I'd be exactly what I accused you of being. Isabel felt something fundamental shift between them. So what will you do instead? Let Adrian go, not as punishment or noble sacrifice, but because he's right. We both deserve marriages we chose honestly. Lydia stood. And I'm going to stop letting you manage my life by managing you in return. I'm going to be angry openly instead of deploying it strategically. I'm going to make my own terrible choices instead of blaming you for yours. Lydia. I'm not doing this for you, her sister interrupted. I'm doing it because I'm tired of being managed, of managing in return, of this entire family treating honesty like a weapon instead of a foundation. She moved toward the door. Good luck with your board vote tomorrow. I hope you keep the trust, not for your sake, for theirs. She gestured at the files surrounding them, then left without waiting for a response. Isabel sat in the lamplight, feeling years of careful distance between herself and her sister crack into something that might eventually become honest connection. Then she heard voices from the main room, multiple voices. She stood, moved to the doorway, and found herself staring at 14 women, every single person employed by the trust, gathered in the entrance. Mrs. Perry stepped forward. We heard about tomorrow's vote. We're here to tell you that if the board removes you, we're walking. Isabel blinked. What? All of us. We'll resign in protest. Mrs. Perry's voice was firm. You gave us jobs when no one else would. You demanded we be excellent instead of pitying us for our circumstances. You built something real here, and we're not letting them take it from you because you made human mistakes. That's not... You can't risk your employment for what? For the woman who told me I deserved better than impossible circumstances? Mrs. Perry crossed her arms. Miss Ashford, you're controlling and demanding and occasionally insufferable. You're also the only person who's ever treated us like we matter enough to have high standards. So yes, we can risk our employment, and we will. The other women nodded, a wall of solidarity Isabel had never expected and didn't know how to accept. This is impractical, she managed. If you walk, you lose income. Our families will understand that some things matter more than practicality, Sarah Mitchell said quietly. You taught us that. When you told me I had 2 weeks to improve or I was done, you taught me that I was worth holding to standards, that I mattered enough to demand excellence from. You don't get to tell us we can't return the favor. Isabel felt her throat close. She'd spent 3 years building this trust as proof she could choose herself. Turned out she'd also built something else. Connection forged through honesty instead of management, support built on mutual respect instead of strategic care. Thank you, she said, voice rough. But I need you to promise me something. What? If the board removes me and you walk in protest, you come back when they find new leadership. This place matters more than my involvement. The work matters more than who runs it. Mrs. Perry smiled slightly. We'll consider it after we make our point. The women stayed for another hour, drinking tea that Mrs. Mitchell brought from her bakery, talking about nothing and everything. Isabel sat among them feeling something she'd rarely experienced, connection without calculation, support without strategy. When they finally left, the sun was rising and Isabel felt steadier than she had in weeks. Whatever happened at the board vote today, she wasn't facing it alone. Check. The vote took place at 2 o'clock in the same dining room where Isabel had defended the trust 3 weeks earlier. The board assembled in grim silence. 4 members prepared to remove her. 2 prepared to fight. Sir Reginald called the meeting to order. We're here to vote on Miss Ashford's continued leadership of the trust in light of ongoing legal troubles and questions about her judgment. Before we vote, Miss Ashford has requested the opportunity to speak. Isabel stood, hands steady despite the fear hammering through her chest. You've all received my letter, she began. So you know I'm not going to defend my character or claim I've been unfairly accused. I am guilty of manipulation, of control, of treating people like outcomes to be managed. These are facts. The board members watched with varying degrees of sympathy. But I want to be clear about what you're actually voting on today. You're not voting on whether I'm a good person. You're voting on whether personal failings disqualify someone from effective work, and I would argue they shouldn't. She pulled out the employment files, the impact reports, 3 years of documentation. This trust works. 14 women employed, 30 children educated, 0 deficit. These outcomes exist not because I'm admirable, but because I refuse to accept failure and I demand excellence from everyone involved. I am difficult to work with. I am occasionally ruthless about standards. I am also effective. One of the board members, a clergyman named Reverend Shaw, cleared his throat. Miss Ashford, no one questions the trust's effectiveness. We question whether your judgment can be trusted going forward given your ongoing legal troubles with your sister. My sister withdrew her lawsuit this morning, Isabel said quietly. Silence. She dropped all claims. Not because I deserve mercy, but because she realized that using control to punish control just perpetuates the same pattern. Isabel met Reverend Shaw's eyes. As for my judgment, I have made terrible choices. I gave up the man I loved and engineered his marriage to my sister because I was afraid of uncertainty. That was manipulative and wrong. But I'm not making that choice now. I'm choosing honesty. I'm choosing risk. I'm choosing to build something real instead of something strategic. Yeah. And if that choice fails, another board member asked. If your relationship with Mr. Grayson becomes public and damages the trust's reputation, then I will accept the consequences, including removal from this board. But I won't preemptively sacrifice honesty to protect reputation. Isabel's voice steadied, because that's the same pattern that led me to give him up 3 years ago. Control disguised as protection, and I'm done with that. Sir Reginald leaned forward. What are you asking us to vote on, Miss Ashford? I'm asking you to separate competence from character, to judge me on outcomes rather than perfection, and to trust that someone can make terrible personal choices and still do meaningful work. She paused. But I'm also promising that if you keep me as chair, I will be completely transparent about my relationship with Adrian, about the ongoing legal complications, about every choice that might impact this organization. No more strategic management, just honest accountability. Wo ibao boys satsuma bao. That's quite a promise, Reverend Shaw said. It's the only one I can make honestly. The board conferred quietly. Isabel stood at the head of the table, hands folded, breathing deliberately while her future hung in the balance. Finally, Sir Reginald called for the vote. 4 in favor of Isabel's continued leadership. 2 opposed. The trust stood. Isabel remained as chair. She sat down carefully, feeling something fundamental release in her chest. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank us yet," Sir Reginald said. "You've promised transparency. We'll hold you to it. And Miss Ashford?" "Yes?" Try to make fewer catastrophically complicated personal choices going forward. They're exhausting for everyone involved." The room released into quiet laughter. The room. And Isabel felt herself smile despite everything. Bashk. She was leaving the estate 2 hours later when she found Adrian waiting by the gate. "I heard about the vote," he said. "News travels fast." Mrs. Henderson sent a note. "She seems to think I have a vested interest in your well-being." Adrian moved closer. "Congratulations." "Thank you." And Adrian, Lydia withdrew her lawsuit. His expression shifted. "When?" "This morning. She came to the trust offices and told me she was dropping all claims, said she was tired of managing me by trying to destroy me." Adrian absorbed this, looking stunned. "That's unexpected." "Ma, she's changing. We both are." Isabel met his eyes. "She's letting you go, honestly not strategically, and I'm—" She paused, searching for words that weren't carefully calculated. "I'm asking you to wait. While the divorce proceeds. While I figure out how to be honestly uncertain instead of strategically controlled. While we both learn how to build something real." "What pool?" "I'm already waiting," Adrian said quietly. "Question is whether you're going to let yourself want me without calculating whether it's optimal." Isabel felt her throat tighten. "I'm trying. It's harder than I expected." "Most worthwhile things are." He reached for her hand and Isabel let him take it without flinching away. "But Isabel, you need to understand something. I'm not going to be patient forever. Not because I don't care, but because patience without progress is just another form of avoidance. At some point, you have to actually choose uncertainty instead of just promising to try. How long?" "I don't know, but we'll figure it out." Adrian squeezed her hand once, then released it. Together, messily, without guarantees. He left before Isabel could respond, and she stood at the gate, watching his carriage disappear into the winter evening, feeling terrified and hopeful, and completely uncertain about what came next. Behind her, the estate house glowed with lamplight. Ahead, the path stretched into darkness. Isabel took a breath and started walking forward, choosing the uncertain path for the first time in her life without knowing if it would lead anywhere safe. Isabel walked for an hour in the gathering dark, her breath forming clouds in the February cold, before she realized she had no destination, just movement, just the physical act of choosing a direction without calculating where it would lead. The path took her past the boundary markers between the Ashford estate and the neighboring holdings, land she'd managed for over a decade, every acre measured and cataloged in her mind like a living ledger. She knew which fields drained poorly, which tenants needed firmer oversight, which parcels could be consolidated for better yield. She stopped at the old stone bridge where the drainage system she'd designed 3 years ago channeled water from the upper fields into the main creek. The system had never worked quite right, always pooling in the low corners, always requiring adjustment and maintenance. Isabel had calculated the angles precisely, followed every engineering principle, and still the water found ways to defy her planning. She stood on the bridge, looking down at the dark water, and felt a laugh bubble up that was half exhaustion, half revelation. Even the land wouldn't cooperate with her control. "Miss Ashford?" Isabel turned to find Thomas Wright, one of the tenant farmers, approaching with a lantern. He looked concerned in the way people did when they found Gentry wandering alone in the dark. "Thomas, I'm fine, just walking." "Bit late for a walk, miss." He held up the lantern, studying her face. "If you don't mind my saying, you look like you've had a difficult day." "You could say that." Thomas nodded slowly. "Heard about the board meeting, about Mrs. Grayson's lawsuit getting dropped. County's full of talk." "Of course it was." Isabel managed a tired smile. I'm sure the gossip is colorful. Some of it. But there's other talk, too. Thomas shifted his weight. About how the trust women were ready to walk if the board removed you. About how you told the board they could judge your work without approving your character. That took courage, miss. Isabel felt something catch in her throat. Or desperation. Maybe both. Thomas gestured at the drainage system below them. You know this never worked right. The water still pools in the northeast corner every spring. I know. I've tried 3 different modifications. With respect, miss, I don't think modifications are the problem. Thomas set down his lantern. You designed this system to control the water, force it into channels you calculated would work. But water doesn't work that way. It finds its own path. Always has. Isabel stared at him. Are we still talking about drainage? I'm talking about whatever applies. Thomas picked up his lantern. Sometimes the answer isn't better control. It's learning which things can't be controlled and working with them instead of against them. The land taught me that. Maybe it could teach you too. He tipped his hat and walked on, leaving Isabel standing on the bridge with the sound of water flowing stubbornly through channels that had never quite matched her calculations. She stood there for another 20 minutes, watching the dark water, before walking home with Thomas Wright's words echoing in her head. Sometimes the answer isn't better control. The next week brought a rhythm Isabel had never experienced before. Not the controlled efficiency of her usual schedule, but something messier. She worked at the trust offices, yes, but she also let herself leave early when exhaustion made her sharp with the staff. She reviewed estate accounts but admitted to Dennis when the numbers stopped making sense after too many sleepless nights. She wrote to Adrian 3 times before actually sending a letter, and even then it was only 4 sentences. I'm learning to sit with uncertainty. It's uncomfortable, and I'm terrible at it. But I'm trying. Are you still waiting? His response came 2 days later. Yes. Come see me when you're ready. Not when it's strategically optimal. When you're ready. Isabel tucked the letter away and tried to figure out what ready meant when she'd spent 30 years equating readiness with perfect preparation. On Thursday afternoon, Margaret Chen arrived at the estate with news about Lydia's withdrawn lawsuit. She filed the dismissal officially, Margaret said, spreading papers across Isabel's study desk. With prejudice, meaning she can't refile the same claims. It's done. Just like that? Just like that. Margaret studied Isabel's face. You look surprised. I'm surprised she followed through. Part of me expected her to change her mind. People do change, Miss Ashford, even when we don't expect them to. Margaret gathered her papers. Which brings me to something else. Mr. Grayson's divorce petition is proceeding faster than anticipated. Mrs. Grayson isn't contesting, and she's agreed to mediation rather than drawn-out litigation. At this rate, the marriage could be dissolved within 3 months. 3 months. The timeline made Isabel's chest tighten with something between hope and panic. That's good news, she managed. Is it? Margaret's voice was gentle. Because you look terrified. I am terrified. What if I'm not ready in 3 months? What if I am ready and it still fails? What if, Miss Ashford? Margaret's interruption was firm. You're doing it again. Calculating outcomes instead of experiencing the present. The divorce timeline is what it is. Your feelings are what they are. You don't have to have answers yet. Then what am I supposed to do? Whatever comes next, without knowing if it's right. Margaret stood. I'll keep you informed of any developments. In the meantime, try to stop treating uncertainty like a problem to be solved. She left, and Isabel sat in her study surrounded by ledgers and account books, all the evidence of her ability to control outcomes, and felt completely lost. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway with tea and the knowing expression that meant she'd been eavesdropping. 3 months isn't very long, the housekeeper said, setting down the tray. I know. Also isn't very short. Enough time to figure things out if you stop spending all of it worrying about whether you're figuring things out correctly. Isabel looked up. When did you become a philosopher? When I started working for a woman who treats every human experience like a tactical exercise. Mrs. Henderson poured tea with brisk efficiency. Miss Ashford, you've survived your father's death, estate debt. a sister's illness, giving up the man you loved, public humiliation, and a lawsuit. You'll survive 3 months of uncertainty. The question is whether you'll let yourself actually live through it instead of just managing it. Everyone keeps telling me to stop managing. Because you need to hear it repeatedly until it sinks in. Mrs. Henderson handed her a teacup. Now, drink your tea and go do something that doesn't involve ledgers or strategy. Such as, Mum, I have no idea. You're the one who needs to figure out what Isabel Ashford does when she's not being competent and controlled. Isabel spent the next 2 weeks trying to answer that question. The results were mixed at best. She attempted gardening and lasted 40 minutes before reorganizing the entire tool shed by efficiency of use. She tried reading novels but kept mentally cataloging plot holes instead of enjoying the stories. She even attended a village social gathering, which ended with her accidentally reorganizing the refreshment table and offending the hostess. "You're not very good at leisure," Mrs. Perry observed after finding Isabel at the trust offices on a Saturday afternoon when she was supposed to be resting. "I'm discovering that." "Maybe that's fine. Maybe you don't need to be good at traditional leisure activities. Maybe you just need to find things you enjoy that aren't work." Mrs. Perry settled into the chair across from Isabel's desk. "What did you like doing before you became responsible for everything?" Isabel tried to remember. Before her father died, before the estate debt, before she'd learned to turn every activity into productivity, what had she actually enjoyed? "I liked the land," she said slowly. "Not managing it, just walking it, learning how water moved through the soil, how crops grew in different conditions. I liked understanding systems without having to control them. So do that." "That's not productive." "Sad." "So what?" Mrs. Perry's voice was gentle but firm. "Miss Ashford, you've built a trust that helps 15 families. You've saved an estate from bankruptcy. You've done enough productive things to last 3 lifetimes. Maybe it's time to do something just because you enjoy it." The concept felt foreign, dangerous even. But that evening, Isabel walked the estate boundaries again, this time without cataloging problems or calculating improvements. Just observing. The way winter light hit the bare trees, how frost formed patterns in the low-lying fields, the sound of water moving through channels that didn't quite match her engineering but worked anyway. She walked for 2 hours and accomplished nothing except a growing sense that Thomas Wright had been right about more than drainage systems. Some things couldn't be controlled, and maybe that was fine. The shift came gradually, then all at once. Isabel started spending mornings at the trust offices and afternoons walking the estate. She reviewed accounts but stopped obsessing over minor variances. She met with beneficiaries but let them sometimes fail without immediately intervening with solutions. She wrote to Adrian weekly, short letters that said nothing strategic and everything honest. "I'm learning to walk without destinations. It's strange but not entirely terrible. I let Sarah Mitchell make a mistake with the bakery accounts this week and didn't fix it for her. She fixed it herself. I'm still not sure if that counts as progress or just negligence. Mother asked how I'm doing and I told her I have no idea. She said that was the most honest answer I'd given in years." His responses were equally brief, equally honest. "I'm living in a hotel and learning to cook badly. Turns out, I'm not very competent without staff. It's humbling. The divorce mediation is proceeding. Lydia is being surprisingly gracious about asset division. I think she's as tired of pretense as we are. I miss you. Not strategically, just constantly." That last letter stayed in Isabel's pocket for 3 days before she could bring herself to respond. "I miss you too. I'm trying to figure out what to do with that feeling besides manage it." 4 weeks into this new rhythm, Isabel received an urgent message from Dennis. Emergency board meeting called for the following afternoon. No explanation given. She walked into the trust offices the next day expecting crisis and found something else entirely. The full board sat around the conference table, along with Margaret Chen, Sir Reginald, and, unexpectedly, Adrian. Isabel stopped in the doorway. "What's going on?" Sir Reginald stood. "Miss Ashford, thank you for coming on short notice. Please sit." Isabel sat, every instinct screaming that this was an ambush of some kind. She glanced at Adrian. but his expression was carefully neutral. Dennis cleared his throat. Miss Ashford, the board has been reviewing the trust performance over the past 4 weeks, since the vote to retain your leadership. And we've noticed something interesting. Dennis slid a document across the table. Outcomes have improved, not dramatically, but measurably. Employee satisfaction is up. Retention rates are higher. Even the beneficiaries report feeling more supported. Isabel scanned the numbers, confused. That doesn't make sense. I've been less involved, not more. I've let people make mistakes without immediately correcting them. Exactly, Sir Reginald said. You've stopped micromanaging and started trusting your employees to be competent. Turns out they rise to the expectation. I don't understand what this meeting is about. Margaret Chen spoke up. It's about recognition, Miss Ashford. The board wants to formally acknowledge that your recent approach, less control, more trust, has been beneficial. They're proposing to expand the trust's operations based on this new model. Isabel felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. You want to expand because I'm doing less? We want to expand because you're doing differently, Reverend Shaw corrected. You've shifted from managing outcomes to creating systems that allow people to manage themselves. That's sustainable growth, Miss Ashford. The previous model worked, but it required you to be involved in everything. This model allows the trust to grow beyond your personal capacity. I'm not sure I know how to replicate this, Isabel said slowly. What I've been doing the past month isn't strategy. It's just trying not to control everything. Then keep trying, Sir Reginald said, because whatever you're doing is working. The board is prepared to allocate additional funding for expansion. We want to open a second location, hire more staff, extend the education programs. Yes, I say shutbutsteet. Isabel looked around the table, board members nodding in agreement, Dennis beaming with obvious pride, Margaret Chen looking professionally satisfied. Then she looked at Adrian, and he smiled slightly. Congratulations, he said quietly. You accidentally succeeded by letting go. The irony was so sharp, Isabel almost laughed. She'd spent 3 years building the trust through ruthless control and precision management. 4 weeks of fumbling through uncertainty had apparently been more effective. I need to think about this, she said. Expansion is a significant commitment. I want to make sure we're doing it for the right reasons. The right reasons being, Reverend Shaw asked, that we can actually help more people, not just that the numbers look good. Isabel met his eyes. I've spent enough time prioritizing optics over impact. If we expand, it has to be because the work matters, and we have capacity to do it well. Sir Reginald nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Take a week to consider the proposal. Bring us a plan that reflects your new approach. Less control, more trust, same standards. The meeting adjourned. Board members filed out with handshakes and congratulations that Isabel barely registered because her mind was spinning. Adrian lingered after the others left. You look stunned, he said. I accidentally built something better by doing less. That shouldn't be how this works. Why not? You spent 3 years controlling every outcome. Maybe the system you built was strong enough to function without constant intervention. You just needed to step back far enough to see it. Isabel sank into a chair. This feels like cheating. Or it feels like trust. Adrian moved closer. You trusted your employees to be competent. You trusted the systems you'd built. And it worked. That's not cheating. That's growth. When did you get so wise about my psychological development? When I spent 3 months in a hotel learning that I'm not very good at functioning independently either. Turns out we're both recovering control addicts. He smiled slightly. How's the uncertainty practice going? Terribly. I panic regularly. I keep trying to calculate optimal outcomes for situations that don't have optimal outcomes. But Isabel paused, searching for honesty. I'm learning slowly, with frequent backsliding. That's all anyone can ask. They sat in the quiet office, and Isabel felt the space between them shift from careful distance to something more fragile, more possible. The divorce will be final in 6 weeks, Adrian said quietly. Lydia signed the mediation agreement yesterday. No contest, clean separation, generous settlement that I insisted on despite her protests. Eats. 6 weeks. Less time than Isabel had expected. More than enough time to panic about. How do you feel about that? She asked. Relieved. Sad. Guilty that I'm relieved, which probably means I'm exactly as complicated as everyone else. Adrian met her eyes. How do you feel about it? Terrified that 6 weeks isn't enough time to figure out how to be someone who can handle a real relationship. Also terrified that it's too much time to sit with uncertainty without defaulting to strategic planning. So we're both terrified. That's a start. He stood, pulled on his coat. Isabel, I'm not expecting you to be perfect in 6 weeks. I'm not expecting you to have everything figured out. I'm just expecting you to keep trying, to keep choosing uncertainty over control. Can you do that? Isabel thought about the past month, the walks without destinations, the letters without strategy, the trust expansion happening because she'd stopped micromanaging. I can try, she said. I'll probably fail repeatedly, but I'll try. Then I'll see you in 6 weeks. Or sooner, if you get tired of waiting for optimal timing. Adrian paused at the door. And Isabel? What you've built here is extraordinary, not despite your flaws, because you channeled them into something that matters. Don't forget that while you're learning to let go. He left, and Isabel sat in the trust office surrounded by evidence that letting go could lead to growth, feeling simultaneously hopeful and absolutely terrified. Word of the trust's expansion spread through the village faster than Isabel could have managed if she'd tried. Within days, women were appearing at the offices asking about employment opportunities. Families were inquiring about education programs. Even other landowners started sending inquiries about replicating the model on their estates. Isabel found herself in the unexpected position of being sought after for advice on how to build systems that function through trust rather than control. It's absurd, she told Dennis after the 5th inquiry that week. I barely understand what I'm doing. How am I supposed to advise others? Tell them the truth. That you built systems through ruthless precision, then accidentally discovered they worked better when you stepped back. Dennis smiled. Honesty seems to be working well for you lately. Isabel couldn't argue with that. She spent the following week drafting a proposal for the trust expansion that felt nothing like her usual meticulous planning. Instead of calculating every detail, she outlined principles. Instead of managing outcomes, she described creating capacity. Instead of controlling growth, she focused on sustainable systems. It was the messiest proposal she'd ever written. It was also, she suspected, the most honest. She presented it to the board on a Thursday afternoon, standing in front of people who'd seen her at her most calculating and her most vulnerable. This expansion plan is built on trust rather than control, Isabel began, which means I can't guarantee specific outcomes. I can't promise exact timelines or perfectly managed implementation. What I can promise is systems that allow people to be competent, standards that demand excellence, and enough flexibility to adapt when things don't go according to plan. Reverend Shaw leaned forward. That's quite different from your usual approach. Because my usual approach was building things I could control perfectly. This is building things that can grow beyond my control. Isabel met his eyes. Isabel met his. The trust works because the women employed here are excellent at their work, not because I manage every detail. If we expand, we need to hire people who are excellent and trust them to be excellent. That's uncomfortable for me. It's also the only sustainable path forward. Sir Reginald studied the proposal. You're recommending we hire a second administrator, someone to manage the new location independently. Yes, someone competent who doesn't need my constant oversight. Isabel paused. I've also recommended we establish a beneficiary advisory board. Let the women we've helped have input on programs and policies. They understand the needs better than I do. The room went silent. You're giving away control, one board member said slowly. I'm distributing responsibility to people who've earned it. Isabel's voice was steady. Control concentrated in one person creates bottlenecks and limits growth. Distributed responsibility creates sustainability. And if the new administrator makes different choices than you would, then we evaluate outcomes, not adherence to my preferences. If the work is effective and ethical, the approach doesn't have to match mine perfectly. Sir Reginald set down the proposal with a look that might have been pride. "This is extraordinary, Miss Ashford. Not the plan itself, though it's sound, but the fact that you're willing to build something you can't personally control. I'm willing to try. Whether I actually succeed at not interfering remains to be seen." The board voted unanimously to approve the expansion with Isabel's proposed structure. Walking out of that meeting, Isabel felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of success. She'd built the trust through control. She was growing it through trust. And somehow, the second approach felt both more terrifying and more right. Months. 3 weeks before Adrian's divorce was set to be finalized, Isabel received an unexpected letter from Lydia. "Isabel, I'm leaving for the continent next month. Mother thinks I'm running away. Perhaps I am. But I prefer to think of it as choosing something for myself, rather than reacting to what others have chosen. I don't forgive you for the manipulation. I'm also not interested in maintaining anger as a permanent state. We are both trying to be different people than we were. That seems worth acknowledging, even if we're not ready to be sisters in any meaningful way. I hope your trust expansion succeeds. I hope Adrian makes you happy in ways my marriage to him never could. Mostly, I hope we both learn to make choices we don't have to spend years justifying. Lydia." Isabel read the letter 3 times, feeling the complicated mix of grief and relief that came with honest endings. She wrote back that same evening, "Lydia, I don't expect forgiveness. I'm still learning what accountability looks like when apologies aren't enough. I'm glad you're choosing something for yourself. I hope the continent gives you space to figure out who you are when you're not performing strength or fragility for an audience. If you ever want to write, not to reconcile, just to be honest, I'll read whatever you send. Isabel." She sent it before she could calculate whether honesty was strategically wise, and felt something like peace settle in her chest. They might never be close, but at least they were done pretending. Passes. 2 weeks before the divorce finalized, Isabel walked the estate boundaries and found herself back at the old stone bridge where Thomas Wright had offered his wisdom about water and control. The drainage system still didn't work perfectly. Water still pooled in the northeast corner despite 3 years of modifications. But looking at it now, Isabel saw what she'd missed before. The pooling water wasn't failure. It was the system finding its own equilibrium. The water collected there because the land naturally formed a depression that her engineering had tried to override instead of accommodate. Isabel stood on the bridge, looking at the pool of water reflecting winter sky, and felt understanding click into place. Some systems needed to be controlled. Others needed to be understood and worked with. The trick was knowing the difference. She walked back to the estate house with the beginnings of an idea forming. Not about drainage, about everything. About trust and control. About building systems that accommodated reality instead of trying to force reality into predetermined channels. The estate land office had survey maps dating back 100 years. Isabel spread them across the dining table and began comparing historical water patterns to her engineered channels. Mrs. Henderson found her there at midnight, surrounded by maps and calculations. "You're supposed to be learning not to work constantly," the housekeeper observed. "This isn't work. This is—" Isabel paused, searching for the right word. "Understanding. I'm trying to understand why my drainage system never worked right. And I've been trying to control where the water goes instead of understanding where it wants to go." Isabel traced a pattern on the oldest map. "The land has natural channels. I tried to override them with engineering, but the water keeps finding its way back to these original paths." Mrs. Henderson studied the maps. "So what will you do? Redesign the system to work with the land instead of against it. Let the water pool where it naturally wants to pool, and channel it from there instead of trying to prevent the pooling entirely." That sounds like a metaphor. It probably is. Isabel smiled tiredly. But it's also practical. I'm tired of fighting systems that would work fine if I stopped trying to force them into shapes that look like success to me. She spent the next week working with Thomas Wright and 2 other tenant farmers who understood the land better than any engineering manual. They surveyed the fields together, identified natural drainage patterns, and designed a system that accommodated rather than overrode. "This might not work," Thomas warned. "Following the land's lead isn't guaranteed success." "No. But fighting the land hasn't worked either. At least this way we're failing in cooperation rather than control." They implemented the new drainage system over 10 days of hard physical labor. Isabel worked alongside the farmers, getting mud-covered and exhausted in ways she hadn't since she was a girl trailing after her father. When the first spring rain came, water flowed through the new channels into the natural depression in the northeast corner, where it pooled exactly as the land wanted. Then it drained gradually through an outlet they'd built that followed the natural slope instead of fighting it. The system worked. Not perfectly, but well enough. Isabel stood at the bridge watching water move according to its nature rather than her engineering, and felt something fundamental settle into place. She'd learned to work with uncertainty instead of controlling it. Now she just needed to apply that same principle to everything else in her life. 1 week before Adrian's divorce finalized, Isabel received word that the trust's second location had found its administrator. A woman named Rachel Morrison, who'd spent 10 years managing a factory before her husband's death, left her looking for different work. She was competent, demanding, and completely unintimidated by Isabel's reputation. "I'll run this location my way," Rachel said during her interview. "I respect what you've built, Miss Ashford, but I'm not interested in being a copy of you. If that's a problem, tell me now." Isabel felt her old instincts rise. The need to ensure consistency, to maintain control, to guarantee outcomes matched her standards. Then she looked at Rachel Morrison's references. 10 years of documented excellence. Letters from former employees praising her firm but fair management. Evidence of someone who demanded competence without requiring perfection. "It's not a problem," Isabel said. "Run it your way. Just maintain the same commitment to actual outcomes over comfortable pretense." "I can do that." They hired Rachel on the spot, and Isabel walked out of that meeting feeling like she'd crossed some invisible threshold. She'd hired someone explicitly to do things differently than she would. She'd given away control voluntarily instead of having it taken through crisis. It felt terrifying and right in equal measure. That evening, she wrote to Adrian, "The divorce is final in 7 days. I know you said to come find you when I'm ready. I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm done waiting for readiness that might never arrive. Can I see you tomorrow? Not for anything strategic, just because I miss you and I'm tired of managing that feeling instead of acting on it." His response came at midnight, delivered by a messenger who looked amused to be carrying romantic correspondence. "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. The bridge between our properties. The one where we first talked about water and systems and all the things you finally learned to stop controlling." Isabel read it, felt her heart hammer, and realized she'd just made a choice without calculating optimal outcomes first. The fear was immediate and overwhelming. The relief was stronger. Isabel spent the morning of their meeting trying not to strategize what she'd say. She failed repeatedly, wrote 3 different versions of opening statements, then burned all of them and decided to just show up and see what happened. Revolutionary approach for her. She arrived at the bridge 10 minutes early because promptness was one control she wasn't ready to relinquish. The water below flowed through her new drainage channels, moving according to its nature rather than her engineering. Adrian appeared at precisely 2 o'clock, which meant they were both still working on letting go of control, but hadn't quite mastered it yet. "You came," he said. "I did, without calculating whether it was optimal timing. That's progress." Adrian moved to stand beside her at the bridge railing. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying. Also something else I don't have a word for yet. Hope? Maybe. Or just exhaustion from trying to manage uncertainty." Isabel looked at him properly for the first time in weeks. He looked tired but settled, like someone who'd survived something difficult and come out changed. "How are you?" "Divorced as of 3 days ago. Living in a hotel and eating badly. Learning that I'm not very good at being alone." Adrian smiled slightly. "But I'm better at it than I was at being married to someone I didn't choose honestly. So that's progress." "I'm sorry you had to go through that." "Don't be. It needed to happen. What I'm sorry about is that it took 3 years and public humiliation to get here." He paused. "What about you? How's the uncertainty practice?" "Well, Mixed results. I let the trust hire an administrator who explicitly plans to do things differently than I would. I redesigned the estate drainage by working with the land instead of trying to control it. I'm writing letters without strategic purpose and taking walks without destinations." Isabel took a breath. "I'm also still terrible at sitting with feelings I can't manage, but I'm trying. That's all I asked for. That They stood at the bridge, watching water flow, and Isabel felt the weight of 3 years of strategic avoidance and 4 months of fumbling toward honesty pressing against her chest. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Build a relationship honestly instead of managing it strategically. I don't have a model for it. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. Adrian turned to face her. Isabel, I'm not expecting perfection. I'm just expecting you to keep choosing honesty even when it's uncomfortable. Can you do that? Isabel thought about the trust expansion built on distributed control, about drainage systems that worked with nature instead of against it, about hiring someone explicitly to do things differently, about all the ways she'd learned to stop fighting uncertainty and start working with it. Yes, she said. I can do that. I'll probably fail at it sometimes. I'll probably default to strategic planning when I get scared, but I'll keep trying. Then that's enough. Adrian reached for her hand and Isabel let him take it without calculating what it meant or where it would lead. We have time. No guarantees, but time. We can use it to build something real. Something real sounds terrifying. Most worthwhile things are. Isabel laughed, feeling the fear and hope tangled together into something she didn't have to manage or control. Just experience. All right, she said, let's try building something real, messily, without guarantees. Adrian smiled and pulled her close, and Isabel let herself lean into the embrace without strategizing her next move. Just being present, just choosing this moment without knowing what came next. The water flowed through channels that worked with its nature rather than against it. The trust was growing through distributed trust rather than concentrated control, and Isabel Ashford was finally, terrifyingly, learning to build a life she didn't have to engineer. She had no idea if it would work, but for the first time in 30 years, the not knowing felt like possibility instead of threat. They stood at the bridge for an hour, not saying much, just existing in the same space without agenda or calculation. When the February cold finally drove them apart, Adrian walked Isabel back to the estate boundary. I'm staying at the hotel until I find proper lodging, he said. The divorce settlement gave Lydia the house. She's selling it and moving to France next month. France? Paris specifically. She says she wants to be somewhere no one knows her as the fragile Ashford sister or the abandoned Grayson wife. Just Lydia figuring out who that is. Isabel felt a pang of something that might have been regret or might have been hope. I'm glad she's choosing something for herself. So am I. Adrian paused at the boundary marker. Can I see you again? Not in 6 weeks or when it's strategically appropriate. Tomorrow, maybe. Or the day after. The question should have sent Isabel into calculations about optics and timing and proper intervals. Instead, she heard herself say, tomorrow. Come to the estate for dinner. Mother will be horrified by the short notice, which is reason enough to do it. Adrian laughed, surprised and genuine. 6 o'clock? 6 o'clock. He left, and Isabel walked back to the estate house feeling like she'd just done something simultaneously ordinary and revolutionary. She was choosing what she wanted, without strategy, without guarantee, just choosing. Mrs. Henderson met her at the door with raised eyebrows. Mr. Grayson is coming to dinner tomorrow, Isabel said before the housekeeper could ask. Please inform Mother and make whatever arrangements are needed. That's rather sudden. It is. I'm trying something new called acting on feelings instead of managing them into optimal timing. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. About time, Miss Ashford. That's... Catherine Ashford's reaction to the dinner news was everything Isabel expected. Tomorrow? Isabel, that's hardly enough time to... To what? Prepare a strategic seating arrangement? Calculate the social implications? Isabel met her mother's eyes. I invited him because I wanted to see him. That's the only reason. Her mother studied her for a long moment. You're different. I'm trying to be. No, you are different. Catherine moved to the window, looked out at the winter garden. You've stopped performing competence as armor. I can see it in how you carry yourself. Less rigid, more present. Isabel wasn't sure how to respond to that. I approve of the dinner, her mother said quietly. Not because it's strategically wise, but because you're choosing what you want instead of what you think you should want. That's growth, Isabel. Real growth. It's terrifying. Most worthwhile things are. Catherine turned back. Your father used to say that, before he died, and I turned you into Atlas. I'm sorry for that, by the way. I know I've said it before, but I'll keep saying it until you believe I mean it. I believe you. Good. Then believe this too. You're allowed to be happy. Messily, imperfectly happy, without earning it through suffering or sacrifice. Her mother's voice was firm. Now go help Mrs. Henderson plan a dinner that's half the fuss you'd usually insist on. Practice letting go of control in small ways. Isabel spent the afternoon doing exactly that. Isabel spent the afternoon and discovered that simple dinners were harder to plan than elaborate ones when you couldn't hide behind excessive preparation. Adrian arrived at 6 o'clock with flowers, which was conventional enough to make Isabel smile. I panicked and defaulted to traditional gestures, he admitted. Apparently, I'm also still learning how to be uncertain. We can be uncertain together. Isabel took the flowers, handed them to Mrs. Henderson. Come in. Mother is pretending she's not eager to assess how damaged we both are. Dinner was surprisingly easy. Catherine asked pointed questions about Adrian's plans now that the divorce was final. He answered honestly. He was looking for a house in the area, considering a partnership offer from a London firm that would let him work remotely most of the time, trying to figure out what his life looked like when it wasn't built around a marriage he'd never chosen honestly. And you're sure you want to stay in this area? Catherine asked. Given the circumstances and the inevitable gossip? I'm sure I want to be where Isabel is, Adrian said simply. The gossip will die down eventually, or it won't, and we'll survive it anyway. Isabel felt something warm settle in her chest at the casual certainty in his voice. After dinner, they walked in the garden despite the cold. The bare trees cast skeletal shadows across the frost-covered lawn. Your mother likes me more than she did 3 years ago, Adrian observed. 3 years ago, you were the man I was visibly manipulating toward my sister. Now you're the man I'm attempting an honest relationship with. The bar has shifted. Attempting is an interesting word choice. Well, I don't know what else to call it. We're not courting in any traditional sense. We're not secretly meeting. We're just, Isabel paused, searching for words. Existing in proximity while trying not to manage the outcome? Adrian laughed. That's possibly the least romantic description of a relationship I've ever heard. Romance has never been my strength. Neither has honesty, historically. But you're managing that fairly well lately. He stopped walking, turned to face her. Isabel, I don't need romance. I need real. I need you showing up as yourself instead of as a carefully curated version designed to minimize risk. Can you do that? Isabel thought about the past 4 months, about admitting manipulation to a boardroom full of people whose respect she valued, about hiring an administrator explicitly to do things differently, about redesigning drainage systems to work with nature instead of controlling it. I can do that, she said. I'll probably backslide sometimes, old habits and all that, but I'll keep trying. Then that's enough. Adrian pulled her close, and Isabel let herself lean into the embrace without calculating whether someone might see them or what they might think. Just being, just choosing this moment. It felt revolutionary. Sang. The following week settled into a pattern that was notable precisely because it wasn't carefully managed. Adrian came to dinner twice a week. Isabel visited his hotel room once, which scandalized Mrs. Henderson until Isabel pointed out that scandal required her to care about other people's opinions more than her own choices. I'm 30 years old and financially independent, Isabel said. I can visit a man's hotel room without requiring society's permission. Society will talk anyway, Mrs. Henderson warned. Let them. I've spent enough time managing other people's perceptions. The trust expansion proceeded faster than Isabel had planned, largely because Rachel Morrison proved to be exactly as competent as her references suggested. The second location opened 6 weeks after her hire, and within a month it was operating at the same level of effectiveness as the original. You barely had to intervene, Dennis observed during a review meeting. Rachel built her own systems. That was the point. I hired her to be excellent without requiring my constant input. And you're not quietly panicking about losing control? Oh, I'm panicking. I'm just not acting on it. Isabel smiled slightly. Progress, not perfection. Bamatasit. Dennis nodded approvingly. So Reginald asked me to pass along a message. He's been fielding inquiries from 3 other estates about replicating the trust model. He wants to know if you'd be willing to consult. Isabel's first instinct was to refuse. Consulting meant managing other people's systems, which was exactly the kind of control she was trying to relinquish. But her second thought was more interesting. I'd be willing to share what I've learned, she said slowly, not to manage their implementations, but to explain the principles. Let them adapt the model to their own circumstances instead of trying to copy mine exactly. That's a very different approach than you'd have taken a year ago. A year ago, I thought control was the same as competence. Turns out they're not. The consulting work began in small ways. Letters to other landowners explaining the trust structure. Occasional meetings where Isabel described principles rather than prescribing methods. It felt strange to share knowledge without trying to control the outcome, but it also felt right. People needed frameworks, not formulas. Understanding, not management. Isabel was learning to provide the first without demanding the second. 3 months after Adrian's divorce finalized, he found a house. It sat on the boundary between the Ashford estate and what had been Sir Reginald's property, a modest stone cottage that had been empty for years. The land agent had shown it to Adrian as a temporary option, but he'd seen something else. It needs work, he told Isabel, walking her through rooms that smelled of dust and disuse. The roof leaks, the floors need replacing, and I'm fairly sure something is living in the chimney, but it's mine. Not inherited, not tied to anyone else's expectations. Just mine, to build into whatever I want. Isabel looked around the shabby cottage and saw what he was seeing. Potential. Space to create something new instead of inheriting something predetermined. It's perfect, she said. You think so? It's hardly grand. It's honest. No pretense, no performance. Just a space that can become whatever you make it. Adrian smiled. Will you help me plan the renovations? Not manage them. I'm not asking you to take over. Just give me your thoughts on what might work. The question was casual, but Isabel understood the weight of it. He was asking her to be involved without controlling, to contribute without managing, to exist in his space without trying to optimize it. I'd like that, she said. They spent the next 2 months working on the cottage together. Adrian hired workers to handle the structural repairs, while Isabel provided opinions on practical matters, water flow, drainage, kitchen layout. She caught herself trying to take over 3 separate times and forced herself to step back each time. I reorganized the entire tool storage, she confessed to Adrian after one such incident. Without asking, old habits. Did it need reorganizing? Probably not. The workers had a system that functioned fine. So fix it tomorrow, put everything back how it was, and apologize for interfering. Adrian said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. You're going to backslide sometimes. Just acknowledge it and correct course. Isabel did exactly that, and discovered that apologizing for overreach was significantly less painful than she'd expected. The cottage renovation became a kind of practice ground for new patterns. Adrian made decisions about his space. Isabel offered opinions when asked, but didn't try to override his choices. They disagreed about paint colors and compromised on something neither had initially wanted but both could live with. It felt messy and uncertain and completely different from how Isabel had approached every other project in her life. It also felt right. Back. 6 months after their reunion at the bridge, Isabel received a letter from Lydia. Isabel, Paris is extraordinary and overwhelming and nothing like I expected. I've enrolled in art classes because I've never tried painting and wanted to do something I'm terrible at without pressure to excel. Turns out I'm spectacularly bad at watercolors. It's freeing in ways I didn't anticipate. I've also met someone, a professor at the Sorbonne who knows nothing about my history and treats me like I'm just a person, not a fragile thing requiring careful handling. We're taking things slowly, or what passes for slowly when you're trying to build a life without performing for anyone but yourself. I heard about the trust expansion. Mother writes occasionally with updates. She says you're consulting with other estates and that your approach is apparently revolutionary for being practical rather than prescriptive. She also mentioned, with excessive subtlety, that Adrian Grayson has purchased a cottage on the estate boundary and that you're helping with renovations. I'm glad you're choosing what you want instead of what you think you deserve. We both spent too many years doing the latter. L. Isabel read the letter 3 times, feeling the complicated mix of loss and possibility that came with honest distance. She wrote back that same evening, Lydia, Paris sounds exactly right for you. I'm glad you're trying things you're bad at without demanding immediate competence. That's braver than anything I've managed lately. The professor sounds promising. The fact that he treats you like a person rather than a problem is significant. As for Adrian and the cottage, yes. We're attempting a relationship built on honesty rather than strategy. It's terrifying and imperfect and better than anything I've experienced. The trust expansion is working precisely because I stopped trying to control every detail. Rachel Morrison runs the second location her own way, and it functions beautifully without my intervention. I'm learning that distributed trust is more sustainable than concentrated control. Who knew? Everyone except me, apparently. I hope you're well. I hope Paris gives you space to become whoever you're meant to be. And Lydia? Thank you for withdrawing the lawsuit. It was generous in ways I didn't deserve but desperately needed. She sent the letter without calculating its strategic implications and felt something like peace settle in her chest. They weren't close. They might never be close. But they were honest with each other, which was better than the performance of sisterhood they'd maintained for 30 years. The formal challenge came from an unexpected direction. Lord Pemberton, a neighboring landowner known for traditional views and resistance to change, appeared at the trust offices on a Tuesday morning demanding to speak with Isabel. Miss Ashford, I've heard about your consulting work with other estates. I've also heard about your methods: distributed control, beneficiary input, minimal oversight. It's concerning. Isabel set down her pen carefully. Concerning how, fool? You're teaching landowners to relinquish authority, to trust workers and tenants with decision-making that should remain in proper hands. Pemberton's expression was stern. It's a dangerous precedent. These people need guidance, not autonomy. These people are competent adults who function better with autonomy than micromanagement. That's a radical position. It's an effective position. The evidence is everywhere. Isabel stood, moved to the filing cabinets. Would you like to see 3 years of outcomes? Employment records showing retention rates that exceed traditional estate management? Education data, demonstrating measurable improvement in literacy and skills? Financial statements proving sustainability? Numbers can be manipulated to show anything, Shang. Then talk to the women employed here. Visit the second location and see Rachel Morrison's management in action. Speak with other landowners who've implemented similar models and achieved similar results. Isabel's voice was calm but firm. Lord Pemberton, I understand that this approach threatens traditional hierarchies. But traditional hierarchies are failing. Workers are leaving estates for cities because they're tired of being managed like children. This model retains talent by treating people with the respect their competence deserves. Pemberton studied her with something between hostility and curiosity. You've changed, Miss Ashford. 3 years ago, you ran your estate with ruthless control. Now you're advocating for distributed authority. What happened? I learned that control and competence aren't the same thing, that the strongest systems are built on trust rather than oversight, and that holding on to authority I didn't need was preventing growth I desperately wanted. That sounds like weakness. Well, that is certain. It's strength, actual strength, not performance of it. Isabel met his eyes. The weak approach is clinging to control because you're afraid of what happens when you let go. The strong approach is building systems that function without you. Pemberton said nothing for a long moment. Then he stood, adjusted his coat with sharp movements. I came here to tell you that I'm filing a formal complaint with the regional council. Your methods are inappropriate for someone in your position. Women of your class shouldn't be teaching servants to demand autonomy. He moved toward the door. The council will investigate your trust operations and determine whether they meet appropriate standards for charitable work. He left before Isabel could respond. She sat down heavily, feeling the weight of new conflict settle across her shoulders. A regional council investigation would mean scrutiny of every aspect of the trust's operations. Public hearings. Questions about methods and outcomes and whether distributed authority constituted proper governance. It was exactly the kind of challenge that would have sent the old Isabel into strategic management mode. The new Isabel took a breath, walked to Rachel Morrison's office at the second location, and explained the situation without trying to manage Rachel's response. "So Pemberton's upset that we treat workers like adults," Rachel said flatly. "What does he expect us to do? Go back to treating beneficiaries like charity cases who should be grateful for scraps? Probably. He called our methods dangerous precedent." It's good. Let them be dangerous. Let other estates see that treating people with respect works better than managing them into submission. Rachel crossed her arms. "What do you need from me?" Rachel. "Honest testimony if it comes to hearings. Documentation of your management approach and outcomes. Evidence that distributed authority produces results without requiring my constant oversight." Done anything else? Don't change your methods to appease the investigation. Keep doing what works, regardless of whether it makes traditional landowners uncomfortable. Rachel smiled slightly. "I can definitely do that." News of Pemberton's complaint spread through the county within days. Isabel received letters from supporters and critics in equal measure. The trust board called an emergency meeting to discuss strategy. "We need to prepare a defense," Reverend Shaw said. "Document every decision, justify every method, show that our approach meets traditional standards even if it looks different." "No," Isabel said quietly. The board looked at her in surprise. "We don't defend by proving we're traditional. We defend by proving we're effective." Isabel stood, moved to the window. "Pemberton wants us to justify distributed authority using frameworks designed for concentrated control. That's impossible. The entire point is that our model works differently. So we present evidence of effectiveness and let the council decide whether outcomes matter more than tradition." Pause. "That's a significant risk," Sir Reginald said. "The council is composed entirely of traditional landowners. They may not value effectiveness over precedent. Then we lose. But we lose honestly, defending what actually works instead of performing compliance with systems that don't." Isabel turned back to face the board. "I'm done sacrificing truth for approval. If the council shuts us down for being too radical, at least we'll have stood for something real." The room fell silent. Dennis cleared his throat. "That's quite different from your approach at the last challenge. Last time I was defending my right to exist in a space I'd built. This time I'm defending principles that matter more than my personal involvement. If the council decides distributed authority is too dangerous and shuts down the trust, Rachel can rebuild it somewhere else. The model is sound. It doesn't require me specifically." Sir Reginald studied her with something that might have been approval. "You're willing to lose everything you've built for the sake of defending a principle? I'm willing to lose everything I've built if the alternative is compromising into ineffectiveness. The trust matters because it works. If we water down our methods to satisfy Pemberton and the council, we're not preserving the trust. We're destroying what makes it valuable." The board voted unanimously to support Isabel's approach. Defend effectiveness, not tradition. Present evidence of outcomes without trying to fit them into conventional frameworks. It was the most honest strategy Isabel had ever proposed, and it terrified her completely. The regional council hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Isabel spent that time gathering evidence with help from Dennis, Rachel, and every woman employed by the trust. They compiled testimony from beneficiaries, documentation of employment outcomes, education data showing measurable progress, financial statements proving sustainability. But they also included something Isabel had never considered evidence before: stories. Personal accounts from women describing how the trust had changed their lives, not through charity, but through expectation of competence. Mrs. Perry wrote about being told she had 2 weeks to improve or face termination, and how that demand had been more valuable than any sympathy. Sarah Mitchell described Isabel's refusal to rescue her from mistakes, and how learning to solve her own problems had built confidence that traditional charity would have undermined. Rachel Morrison documented her hiring process, emphasizing that Isabel had explicitly encouraged her to manage differently rather than trying to replicate existing systems. The evidence package was comprehensive, honest, and completely unlike anything the council had probably seen before. Adrian reviewed it the night before the hearing, sitting in his cottage kitchen while Isabel paced nervously. "This is extraordinary," he said quietly. "Not because the outcomes are impressive, though they are, but because you're defending a principle without trying to manage how people receive it. I'm terrified they'll shut us down." "They might, but you'll have stood for something real. That matters. Does it matter if the work ends?" The work won't end. Even if the council shuts down your trust, the model exists now. Other estates are already implementing it. You've proven distributed authority works. That can't be undone, regardless of what happens tomorrow. Adrian stood, crossed to where she was pacing. "Isabel, you've built something that outlasts you. That's the definition of success." Isabel stopped pacing, let herself lean against him. "I still might lose everything." "You've already survived losing everything once. You'll survive it again if necessary, but this time you won't be alone." The word settled something in Isabel's chest. Win or lose tomorrow, she had people who valued the work beyond its utility to them. She had Rachel Morrison running a second location independently. She had beneficiaries who'd gained competence rather than dependence. She had Adrian, who understood that sometimes the right choice meant risking everything. "All right," she said. "Let's go defend something worth defending." The hearing took place in the regional council chambers, a formal room designed to emphasize hierarchy and tradition. 12 council members sat at an elevated table. Pemberton sat to the side with his solicitor, looking satisfied and certain. Isabel sat at the defendant's table with Margaret Chen, Rachel Morrison, and Dennis. Behind them, the gallery was filled with trust beneficiaries who'd insisted on attending despite Isabel's protests that their presence wasn't necessary. "It's absolutely necessary," Mrs. Perry had said firmly. "You stood for us. Now we stand for you." Lord Whitmore, the council chairman, called the hearing to order. "We're here to examine complaints against the Ashford Women's Trust regarding inappropriate methods and dangerous precedent. Lord Pemberton has raised concerns about distributed authority, minimal oversight, and teaching dependents to demand autonomy. Miss Ashford, you may present your defense." Isabel stood, feeling every eye in the room on her. "Chairman Whitmore, council members, I'm not here to defend against Lord Pemberton's characterization of our methods. I'm here to present evidence of effectiveness and let you decide whether outcomes matter more than tradition." She nodded to Dennis, who began distributing the evidence packages. "For 3 years, the Ashford Women's Trust has operated on a principle that Lord Pemberton finds dangerous, that adults deserve to be treated as competent rather than managed as dependents. We employ 14 women across 2 locations. We educate 30 children. We operate at zero deficit. These aren't claims, they're documented facts." Isabel walked the council through the evidence systematically. Employment records showing retention rates of 90%. Education data demonstrating measurable literacy improvement. Financial statements proving sustainability without deficit. "But numbers don't tell the complete story," she continued. "So I've included testimony from beneficiaries describing how this model affected them. Not through gratitude for charity, but through recognition of their capability." She read Mrs. Perry's account. Sarah Mitchell's story. 3 others that demonstrated the same pattern. Respect producing competence in ways sympathy never could. "Lord Pemberton calls this dangerous precedent," Isabel said. "I call it effective practice. The question before you is simple. Does this council value effectiveness that challenges tradition, or tradition that limits effectiveness?" Pemberton's solicitor stood. "The issue isn't whether Miss Ashford's methods produce results. It's whether those methods are appropriate for someone in her position. Teaching servants to demand autonomy undermines proper social order." "Proper social order is failing," Rachel Morrison said, standing without being called. "Workers are leaving estates for cities because they're tired of being managed like children. Miss Ashford's model retains talent by offering respect along with employment. That's not undermining order. It's adapting to reality." The chairman frowned. "Miss Morrison, you're not scheduled to testify. Then schedule me, because I run the trust's second location independently, using methods Miss Ashford encouraged but didn't dictate. If you're investigating whether distributed authority works, you should hear from someone who practices it without her oversight." Chairman Whitmore exchanged glances with other council members, then nodded. "Proceed." Rachel described her hiring, her independence, her methods that differed from Isabel's in specific ways while maintaining the same principles. She presented outcomes from her location that matched or exceeded the original trust's results. Miss Ashford didn't build a system that requires her constant control, Rachel concluded. She built principles that function when practiced by different people in different ways. That's not dangerous, it's sustainable. One of the council members, an elderly landowner named Lord Hastings, leaned forward. Miss Morrison, are you saying Miss Ashford doesn't manage your location? She provides consultation when I request it. Otherwise, she trusts me to be competent. Rachel's voice was steady. That trust has produced better outcomes than micromanagement ever could. My retention rate is 95%. My beneficiaries report higher satisfaction than traditional charity programs. And I've done it without Miss Ashford approving every decision. That seems reckless. It seems effective. The evidence is in front of you, so the council conferred quietly. Isabel stood at the defendant's table, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. Everything she'd built hung in the balance. Not just the trust, but the principle it represented, that people deserved respect more than management, that distributed authority produced better outcomes than concentrated control. That effectiveness mattered more than tradition. Chairman Whitmore called the room to order. Miss Ashford, this council has reviewed your evidence and heard testimony from both supporters and critics. We have several concerns about your methods. They do challenge traditional hierarchies. They do teach workers to expect treatment as equals rather than dependents. They do represent significant departure from established practice. Isabel felt her stomach drop. However, Whitmore continued, we also cannot ignore the documented outcomes. 3 years of sustainability, high retention rates, measurable educational improvement, and perhaps most significantly, replication of results under independent management, suggesting the model's effectiveness doesn't depend solely on your personal involvement. He paused, looked around at the other council members. Therefore, this council finds that while the Ashford Women's Trust employs unconventional methods, those methods produce outcomes that meet and exceed standards for charitable work. We find no basis for the claims of impropriety or dangerous precedent. The trust will continue operations without restriction. The gallery erupted. Isabel felt her knees weaken with relief so sharp it was almost painful. However, Whitmore said, voice rising over the noise, we also recommend that Miss Ashford document her methods comprehensively for other landowners, considering similar models. What works in practice should be shared in principle. The Council will support expansion of this approach to other estates, provided implementation is adapted to local circumstances rather than blindly copied. He banged his gavel. This hearing is concluded. Bus. Go. Pemberton stood abruptly and left without speaking. His solicitor followed, looking professionally annoyed at the outcome. Isabel sank into her chair, feeling Dennis's hand on her shoulder and Rachel's quiet congratulations and the noise of celebration from the gallery washing over her. They'd won, not by compromising or performing compliance, but by defending what actually worked. The principle had survived. The trust had survived. And Isabel had proven that building systems stronger than herself was possible. The celebration that night took place at Adrian's cottage, which was now fully renovated and surprisingly comfortable. The trust board attended, along with Rachel Morrison, key beneficiaries, and even Catherine Ashford, who showed up with wine and the admission that she was proud of her daughter for the first time in years. You stood for something real, Catherine said, pulling Isabel aside while others celebrated. You risked everything for a principle, and you won. That's not the daughter I raised to manage outcomes at any cost. That's someone new. I'm still the same person. No, you're the person that one could have become if she'd learned earlier that control and strength aren't synonymous. Catherine squeezed her hand. I'm glad you figured it out, and squeezed, even if it took public humiliation and a lawsuit to get there. Isabel laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Later, when the celebration had quieted and most guests had left, Isabel found herself on Adrian's cottage porch with him. The spring evening was cool, but not cold, and the sound of water flowing through the newly working drainage system created a steady background rhythm. So you've proven distributed authority works, Adrian said. What's next? I have no idea, and that's terrifying and also fine. That's significant progress. Oh, I'm thinking about stepping back from day-to-day trust operations. Let Rachel run both locations while I focus on consulting. Help other estates implement similar principles without trying to manage their specific applications. Isabel paused. Does that sound like running away? It sounds like recognizing that the work has grown beyond needing you specifically. That's not running away, that's success. Isabel leaned against the porch railing, looked out at the land stretching between Adrian's cottage and the estate. 3 years ago, I gave you up because I couldn't imagine building a life that wasn't perfectly controlled. Now I'm considering stepping back from work I built because it's functioning without me. I'm not sure if that's growth or just finding new ways to avoid uncertainty. Can it be both? Growth that feels uncertain because you're not controlling the outcome? Adrian moved to stand beside her. Isabel, the trust works. Your consulting is helping other estates. The principles you've proven are spreading. What do you actually want to do with your life now that you're not desperately trying to prove you can survive loss? The question landed with unexpected weight. What did she want? Not what was strategically optimal. Not what would prove something to someone, just what she wanted. I want to work with the land, Isabel said slowly. Not manage estates. I'm tired of management, but understand water systems, drainage patterns, how to build infrastructure that works with nature instead of fighting it. I want to help farmers implement practical solutions without requiring my ongoing oversight. That sounds perfect for you. It also sounds completely impractical and self-indulgent. So what? You've spent 30 years being practical and self-denying. Maybe it's time to try impractical and self-interested. Adrian smiled. Besides, it's not actually impractical. Farmers need exactly that kind of expertise. You'd be providing value while doing something you enjoy. Isabel felt something shift in her chest, permission she'd never given herself to want things just because she wanted them. What about us? She asked quietly. Where do we fit in all this change? Wherever we want to fit, we're not bound by anyone else's timeline or expectations anymore. Adrian took her hand. Isabel, I love you. I've loved you for 3 years, even when loving you meant watching you engineer my marriage to your sister. I'm not asking you to have everything figured out. I'm just asking you to keep choosing honesty over strategy. Can you do that? Isabel looked at him, this man who'd seen her at her most manipulative and her most vulnerable, who'd refused to let her sacrifice him again out of fear, who understood that growth was messy and uncertain and worth it anyway. Yes, she said, I can do that. Then that's enough. Adrian pulled her close, and Isabel let herself lean into the embrace without calculating what came next. Just being. Just choosing this moment and this man and this imperfect, honest future they were building together. The water flowed through channels designed to work with nature. The trust operated through distributed authority rather than concentrated control. And Isabel Ashford was finally, terrifyingly, building a life she didn't have to engineer. It was messy. It was uncertain. It was real. And standing on Adrian's porch in the spring evening, surrounded by evidence that letting go could lead to growth, Isabel felt something she'd rarely experienced in 30 years of careful control. She felt free. 6 months later, Isabel stood at the boundary between the Ashford estate and Adrian's property, watching workers install the final section of a new drainage system. This one had been designed using principles she'd learned from Thomas Wright and refined through observation, rather than engineering manuals, following the land's natural patterns instead of imposing external structure. The system was simple, almost embarrassingly so compared to her previous elaborate calculations. But preliminary tests suggested it would work better than anything she'd designed through pure control. It's done, Thomas Wright said, walking up beside her. Water should flow clean through here come spring rains. Thank you for your patience with my learning curve. Wasn't patience, miss. Was teaching. Different thing entirely. Thomas looked at the new channels with satisfaction. You're good at this when you stop trying to force the land into doing what you think it should do. That applies to more than drainage. Usually does. He tipped his hat and walked back to his fields, leaving Isabel standing at the boundary with Adrian, who'd wandered over from the cottage. How does it feel? Adrian asked, Building something that works with nature instead of controlling it, satisfying in ways I didn't expect. Also humbling. Turns out I wasted 3 years fighting systems that would have worked fine if I just listened to people who understood them better than I did. Yes, that's a harsh assessment. It's an honest one. Isabel smiled slightly. But I'm learning to separate honesty from self-flagellation. The old systems taught me things. The new ones work better. Both can be true. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the water flow through channels that followed the land's rhythm rather than imposing external order. I got a letter from Lydia, Isabel said. She's getting married. To the professor she mentioned. She sounds happy in ways I've never heard from her before. That's good. She invited us to the wedding in Paris this summer. Isabel paused. I'm thinking about going, not to perform sisterhood or prove we've reconciled, just to show up because she asked. And I want to. That sounds like the right reason. I'm also thinking about proposing something equally improbable. Adrian turned to look at her. Such as? Marriage. To you. Not because it's strategically optimal or socially expected, just because I want to build a life with you, and marriage seems like an honest way to claim that choice publicly. The words hung in the spring air. Adrian blinked. Did you just propose to me? I think I did. Was that too direct? It was perfect. He laughed, surprised and delighted. Though I have to admit, I'd been planning to ask you myself. Had a whole speech prepared about choosing each other honestly and building something real. You still can. I'm willing to be proposed to if you've gone to the trouble of preparing a speech. Forget the speech. Adrian pulled her close, kissed her with the kind of intensity that suggested speeches were overrated anyway. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he said, Yes. To whatever question you were asking, yes. Isabel felt joy bubble up, sharp and unexpected. That's a very non-specific acceptance. It's a very honest one. You want to marry me? Yes. You want to build a life together? Yes. You want to keep learning how to choose uncertainty over control? Yes to that too. He grinned. Was there a specific question I was supposed to be answering? Just the general concept of choosing each other, permanently, honestly, without guarantees. Then yes, absolutely yes. They stood at the boundary between properties, holding each other while water flowed cleanly through channels designed to work with nature. And Isabel felt the last pieces of her carefully controlled life transform into something messier, truer, better. She'd spent 30 years building systems to prevent collapse. Turned out the strongest system was the one that allowed for flexibility, distributed authority, and the honest admission that control was sometimes just fear-wearing strategic clothing. The trust operated independently now. Rachel Morrison ran both locations with competence that occasionally exceeded Isabel's. The consulting work helped other estates implement principles without requiring Isabel's ongoing management. And the drainage systems finally worked because Isabel had learned to follow the land instead of fighting it. Everything she'd tried to control had survived, even thrived, when she'd learned to let go. And standing in Adrian's arms at the boundary between their properties, Isabel Ashford finally understood what her mother had tried to tell her months ago. She didn't have to earn happiness through suffering or sacrifice. She just had to choose it, honestly, imperfectly, without guarantees. The water flowed clean, the land flourished, and Isabel chose love without strategy, building a future she couldn't control but could finally, completely trust. It was terrifying. It was real. It was enough.